Hello there! Welcome to the ReZero podcast! I'm your host, Wolf.
I'm your host, Gold.
And I'm your host, Connor.
And today, gentlemen, we will be discussing and analysing Arc 7, Phase 6 of the ReZero web novel! We are very excited to get into this.
I have been waiting for this phase specifically since we started the ReZero podcast.
This has been the one that's been in the front of your mind?
It was this and You're Not a Hero, Natsuki Subaru. But this phase, mainly like the conclusion, the climax of it, has been what made me fall in love with Arc 7 to the degree that I did and appreciate everything that it does so much more, even if it has my least favorite part of all of ReZero inside of it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I guess me and Gold will discuss our overall thoughts before we get into some more particular topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, guys.
I'll let you take this ahead first, Gold, actually.
Wow, what an honor. My overall thoughts about this arc is that it is a contained sort of bottle story, which I think is something that Teppei is obviously wanting to write in a form and content in this arc, and he pulls it off pretty well, which is like this sort of idea of a prison break almost, right? Almost like that. It was gearing towards that with the setup of like, okay, we have to decide how the rule works, everything like that, and then of course it, like a lot of things in ReZero, gets turned on its head at the very end of the arc. But the setup of this arc is very much so mirroring that. You know, we get thrown into a new place with new characters that we don't know. We're supposed to learn from them and learn how to escape this island with its own set of rules and stuff like that. And we kind of get endeared to it pretty easily. I think the idea of Subaru being a kid works better here than it did in the previous arc during Chaos Flame, maybe because he feels more comfortable and more like himself here. Obviously, we get talking about like how, you know, his personality and his mentality as a kid is still being reflected here. As this is like Subaru that we know, but not really, not quite. Even though he has a lot of information about, you know, what's going on in the scenario, there's still parts of his personality that is infantilized. But yeah, we're here and we're with a cast entirely unknown to us, and I did warm up to a lot of them. A lot of them had kind of cute bit parts to play, and I think this is sort of on purpose. I mean, Cecilus, his entire thing is like, you know, talking about who's the main characters here, you know, who are the people who are worthy enough to be, you know, have even like there's a part I think in the arc where even Cecilus was kind of like speaking almost to the audience and almost like not necessarily, but like he was speaking to, you know, Subaru and was like, hey, you're a main character. Why do you care about these side characters? You know, why do you care what happens to them if they die or not? You know, and that sort of idea was also kind of in the back of our head too. We are like, well, Subaru's really upset all these people are in danger and stuff like that, or he's trying to save all these people, and we have to kind of combat that as well. So I think that's an interesting vector of approach to learning all these new characters all at once, where we're supposed to be like, how much do we care about them? How much should we care about them? You know, we're kind of parsing that throughout the phase, as well as, of course, the climax, which is very exciting, very unnerving, and very well done. I think Todd is probably one of the best written characters in the entire story at this point.
100%.
Just because I think he is, I think what I'm going to say this kind of loosely. I'm just going to say that this is a character that I feel like the author Teppei feels entirely confident that he can do anything with, in the sense, because he feels like he's smart enough to grasp every scenario, you know, and because of that, his, you know, efficiency and understanding and quick on the uptake, how, you know, he's not making a single mistake. And I think that Todd, being that type of character, as well as all of his flaws that we kind of see very clearly, makes him very vibrant and very striking when he's around. But yeah, I think that's interesting. Of course, it leaves us in a nice spot at the end of the phase 2, which I think is exciting and interesting. So yeah, I think this arc was not only exciting, but it kind of flipped a lot of my expectations on its head.
Yeah, I completely
Very well
agree.
put.
There were a lot of things I was expecting going into this phase, you know, like in that sort of vein of when you see this sort of scenario in a lot of stories, there's a lot of tropes and ideas that can come from it that can like color your expectations, I think. And that's true for any specific like contained story scenario that happens in a lot of stories, I find. But Tappei did a really, really good job this phase of setting expectations and turning them on their head, but not in a way that felt like it was unnatural or didn't feel like a natural extension of how the story was going. It didn't feel wrong, it didn't feel unjustified, it felt just right in the most evil ReZero way it could possibly feel, where everything I love and care about is taken away from me slowly and painfully, and there's nothing I can do about it but watch. This phase did a very good job of endearing me to some of the new characters, which I'm very excited to talk about, by the way, because they are amazing and I love them. The way Subaru is handled in this phase is really interesting. I'm much more enjoying his infantilization aspect this phase than the previous phase. I think specifically because he's truly being realized as the child prodigy, like 10-year-old Natsuki Subaru, son of Kenichi Natsuki.
Mm-hmm.
And that is such an interesting like lean to Subaru's character. I just can't help but eat it all up, you know, like it's just, I want to see more and more of how this goes. I don't want to stop reading, even though I have rules with how I do it for this podcast. The climax to this phase is genuinely probably the best climax of the arc yet, in my opinion. One of the best.
Oh, thank goodness.
One of the best climaxes of the entire series. It hits in so many different places. It feels like it's built upon so many different things we've seen in the series so far. It's like a pyramid of all of the things Tappei has built up in the series. And we just get to see so many interesting character dynamics and themes at play. I'm very curious to see how the story is going to go from here. It turned out in the way I expected, but the way we got here was not how I expected at all, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when reading this phase that in the beginning, I was very, very hesitant going into this because I had been spoiled ahead of time that Subaru was blasted away to the Gladiator Island with none of the characters that I liked or cared about. So going in, I was very much in the mindset of I'm not going to like this. I just need to read it and get it over with. But after the first Sparka, just how quickly I latched on to Whites, the tattooed bald man character, and just wanting Subaru to be able to succeed here, and then that just continues on and on until Todd shows up and basically flips the entire phase on its head. But culminating with this incredible climax to it, it cemented this phase as one of my favorite parts of Arc 7, with the climax of it being my favorite in Arc 7. It makes the phase for me. It makes the arc. All of Arc 7 up till now, I had been mixed on reception when I was originally reading it. I liked a lot of it. I didn't like a lot of it. This brought it all together for me and made it feel worth it. It wasn't just Subaru and Wallachia side quest, quote unquote, filler arc.
Yeah, it's still the main quest. We're just on a detour.
Exactly. The connection to Satella here at the end brings Arc 7 back into the main plot and the main story again, which made everything else up until then feel worth it and justified. So that's super important to me. Although, and I want to discuss this later, the second Sparka is the low point of Arc 7 for me. If not the entire series as a whole. I have a lot of issues with it that I want to discuss later, but I don't think it does enough to bring Phase 6 down from my favorite phase so far in Arc 7.
Yeah, I really feel like this phase brought, it was almost as in a lot of long-term stories and a lot of arcs, especially for ReZero. The previous phases, they were, even though they had their own payoffs in their own ways, it felt like a setup and a build-up to this point, where we had these triumphant moments and these terrifying moments, and it feels like a lot of the times peak ReZero moments, where you're on the edge of your seat. There's always a present and very blaring emotion coming through when you're reading. It's very fulfilling in sometimes a very painful way. Oh my god. Reading all of these, in the way I have, has just... I am emotionally drained I am exhausted, guys. I'm tired. Could Subaru have a break, please?
I mean, in a way,
moments.
he does kind of get that break, even though he
does.
doesn't have the pause in it. He does finally catch a break here.
He gets his big fat W. You are correct, but there was so much sacrifice to get to that point. You know.
Yeah, it feels like one of those moments in which Teppei is really not going easy on Subaru, as he put it, you know?
Oh no, absolutely not. I mean, he died probably 500 times this phase easily.
Oh.
I mean, we could probably calculate it out. Like it seems like it was about 30 minutes to an hour that goes by in the last chunk of this phase. That's getting slowly built up by 30 seconds at a time. So, I mean, that's 120 deaths there.
It's I wouldn't say it would be exactly 1,000 deaths, but I think we're getting to the ballpark, at least for this phase, of it getting close to that. At least from the way it's written, it seems to me that it's at such a high level that Teppei cannot feasibly explain it with words, and so by the lack of explaining how many deaths in particular have happened, it like shows the level of how many times he's died. Because before we get very specific, like, explanations of how many times he's died, and I think the closest thing we've got to it not being the case is the 11 seconds of hell, right?
Right.
But we still got like a magnanimous feeling of like, even though we may not know the exact number, it is a crazy amount.
We still knew what he was experiencing each time.
Yeah. And this phase takes a bit of a departure in some places, where in some places I feel it really works, and there's one place I'm very critical of, and I think it's the same point you're thinking of, Connor, that I want to talk about, for different reasons than you, I think, but still have points of critique for. But yeah, it very different structurally, I think, this phase, with how Return by Death works and stuff. It's crazy. This phase has cemented for me, you know, as a ReZero fan in general, I'd love to see Arc 7 animated one day. I think we all would, right? But this phase, I want to see this phase, like, visually. I want to see the things that happen, you know? Like,
Yes.
I could tell by reading through this that this would translate to a visual medium so very well.
I mean, I had that thought about the last phase too. I mean, especially, but this one as well. There's something very striking about the way in which the characters are depicted in this phase, whether it's the writing way being poetic and succinct, as I said before, or just like the scenarios are a lot more varied and vibrant, I would say. And I feel like because of that, there's a lot of like cool things that you can do with directing, and there's cool things you can do with storyboarding that I felt like they were kind of limited by the sort of, you know, talk format that's been kind of abundant in a lot of scenarios beforehand.
You very much get that feeling of, wow, like the sound design in particular in this moment, I could hear being amazing, right? Like specifically Todd's moments. I could imagine the sounds that are playing out in his scenes, and like just thinking of like hearing that in an anime would just be like, oh my god. In terms of music too, and like all these different visual direction things, it very much plays to the imagination. It's really cool to see Teppei have. I think he's experimenting a lot recently. I think Arc 7 has given him the ability to do that, but very much this phase, I think, is a very good showing of how he successfully experiments in a really fun and unique way.
It also shows that he has learned from where it didn't work before.
Yes.
Where, like, our biggest critique of Arc 7 so far was the, like, flashback to Zakir Osman setup chapters, right?
Yeah.
Where here he starts doing the same thing he was setting up there, where we would jump to a different character's perspective and see the result of something, but we wouldn't necessarily have to see every step that Subaru needed to take in order to get there. Like, we got a little bit in that, like we see him go into the Sparka, but there was some missing information.
Yeah, 100%.
Leading up to that one. But like when we switch to Todd's perspective, and he's talking with Gustav, and then we see Subaru and Hyun are in the office, we've already missed like a lot of attempts to get there, but we don't have to go back and see all of them either.
Because the text can very easily tell, even just like that small little bit of narration, that Subaru has failed. And at least the way it's done in this part of the phase, I felt was really well done. There's one part of the phase where I'm very critical of how that structural thing takes place, because it just doesn't feel right to me. But for the rest of this phase, I'm really enjoying that Teppei is is knowing when he doesn't have to show Subaru's deaths, but still make it feel impactful.
Yes, I agree.
No, it's like we're not having wasted time here, you know? We're getting what we need, and we're not having... Because one of my big critiques of Arc 4, at least the web novel, is that there are times where there's too much fluff, and there is just not any space. There's points where I'm like, is this really necessary? Do we really need this specific part? I didn't really feel that in this phase.
Yeah, there's no wasted character interactions. Like,
No.
there's no weird side characters interact. Like, if this was like a few other phases, right, there'd be a moment where Idra's talking to Waits, and you're like, well, why are we doing this? You're like, we have to get to Subaru or something like that, and like, we don't need their perspective. We just get them there to Subaru or whatever. But that doesn't happen in this phase, what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a very good showing that Teppei continues to be a great writer, and he learns from his mistakes, because the other really big thing I want to praise about this phase, and this is something that I feel like is going to be the case as we go forward, Teppei has done a really good job of cutting down his overly descriptive descriptions.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
He has done
this phase
such a
is
good-
clean and nicely paced with it.
It's really well moderated in a way. We learn the information we need to learn visually, but he doesn't overindulge us with information we don't need, or information that would ruin our ability to visualize a story, which is probably would be my biggest critique technically of Teppei's writing from before this.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I have a suspicion that the reason why that's changed now is after the beginning of Arc 7, he started writing out each phase in web novel, and then they would produce it into the light novel volume. And then they would go back, and then they would produce the next light novel volume. And he would go back to the web, and then he would go to the next light novel. So I wonder if he started to pick up on just what exactly the editor was removing, since he was doing it in more real time.
I think that is a very good argument to make, right? Because it was literally back and forth, right? He'd write one phase, then it would be working on the light novel, then he'd be writing the next, and it would be a constant, like, there was very little time in between the light novel of adaptations of that phase coming out and the web novel phase being written, right? And
Pretty much, yeah. Like, I think at one point the light novel beat the like witch cult translations.
oh wow,
Yeah,
that's a fast uptime.
it might have been for this phase actually, but I'm not positive on that. I just know that I do want to praise the pacing of this phase as well, because it doesn't ever feel like we're, similar to what you said before, Gold, meandering here. Like, there's not wasted time. Everything is an important scene in one way or another. Like, we're following through the story and we're getting exactly what we need to see and nothing more. And it's going at a pace, not just necessarily the story pacing, but the actual progression of events move at a pace that kind of keep you constantly on your, like, the edge of your seat of like, where is this going? What's going to happen next? How's he going to get out of this? Until it starts the looping of just building up stress. Because like towards the end, I was speed reading this phase so much. I was like so hooked, I couldn't wait to finish. I think I stayed up to like 3 a.m. to finish it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, once you get to a certain part in this phase, you're like, well, I have to figure out how to get
Clicks
out of this
next.
now. Yeah.
Next.
Pretty much, yeah. All right, so I think overall we kind of have similar thoughts that the phase was pretty well done. So let's start honing in on some of the important parts of this. And I think a good one to start with is Cecilus, however we want to say it. I don't really care.
100%. Yeah,
Ceci!
Yeah, Ceci. He wrenches from the waters around the island both Subaru and Tanza. And Tanza, she's, out of it in the meanwhile. But Cecilus starts talking to Subaru and like, hey, I am Cecilus Segment. And then he's like, I know who that is. That's the first Divine General of Lakia, right?
Mhm.
And he's like, that seems, I mean, he's audacious enough for it to be possible, but I don't know, it could just be a brat saying this just because. And like, as soon as this happens, not just because of the visual accompaniment of the pictures and stuff like that, but it becomes pretty obvious based on his way of speaking, his audacity, the way that his personality is kind of laced together so perfectly that there was no doubt in my mind immediately that this was who that was.
Right. It doesn't feel like it's trying to trick the reader. It's just a confusing plot point of how did this happen to him?
Yeah,
because
I mean, we'll get to that in a second too, because I think that's something that actually, let's get into it now, because there's no point not to. Which
Right.
is, he is infantilized like Subaru but he's also missing his memories. And I think I know why this is the case, and I'm just going to guess it right flat out now. They had to gank him because he's too unpredictable. They were the people who were trying to do this coup was like, okay, Olbart, use your infantilization on him. Somebody else erase his memories, put him here, and we can't kill him because he's still tough as a child. Just like Olbart's thing where he was going over in the like the little breeds, like, yeah, if somebody was as strong as they were, in the body of a child, then it'd be a real problem for me, right? Which I think is foreshadowing that it happened, right?
Well, I think that part specifically is more talking about how Subaru is more dangerous of a person as a kid that doesn't regard his own death loops as much as real Subaru does. But it definitely applies to Cece here too.
Yeah, I think so. Because, I kind of fit that parallel together pretty quickly. So yeah, I think somebody definitely ganked them and said, okay, this guy does whatever he wants. We can't stop him unless we gank him. So we're going to put him to become a child, and then we're going to put him on this island that he's now cursed. He can't get away from here so that we can do our coup. Is just my guess.
I have a slightly different theory about how this works. I think the root of it is the same for me, where I definitely believe it was Olbart that infantilized Ceci, but I don't think anyone erased his memories. I think he's been infantilized for a little while, and the effects of that have made him start to lose his memories. Similar to how Subaru is slowly losing some of his memories, except Ceci has probably been this way for a little bit longer, and that's why he's forgotten so much, is at least my theory.
That's what was at least implied by or guessed by Subaru as well.
Yeah.
The only thing I can really add to it, aside from just knowing answers and such, is that at this point, especially by the end of the phase, I had assumed that Ceci was why Todd was here.
Oh.
That they had sent him to take out the gladiators here because this is where they put Ceci.
Oh, and because he has the curse mark on him that could take him out.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
which is why he was also given Arakia, and make sure that they were coming here together.
And that's why I think that they put him here, is because if you wanted to tape down the strongest person in your country, you have to you have to layer on the possibilities of him dying or him not being able to escape the situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to make sure that he's weaker than he's usually, right? You have to make sure that he doesn't know why he's there. You have to make sure that he is trapped in a spell, like a curse, right? And then he's confined to one place, and all those things kind of tick off. And then when it comes to, okay, we're going to finally kill him because, well, that's the thing that I'm thinking about. It's well, obviously, in my opinion, either Groovy Gumlet wouldn't have given a curse tool powerful enough to kill Cecilus Segment away willy-nilly, so they had to find a convenient workaround to make that possible, which is probably the case. They're like, hey, Groovy Gumlet's cursed weapon is strong enough to kill Cecilus Segment if, it were to hit or whatever. But because you're on this island, it's part of it, right? So that's the way we kill him. It's kind of like a catch. It's we wouldn't normally be able to kill him, but now that he's part of this island, part of this thing, if the thing activates, he dies, right? And
feels very much like this is a solution that we have available. Let's try and see if it works for it.
This makes me think more of how what simultaneously makes Ceci valuable towards a rebellion makes him dangerous towards the establishment, right? In that he's the ultimate wild card. And we see this throughout this phase in particular. Ceci embodies a Joker, chaotic, just wild card character. He is choosing who he sides with based on amusement and not based on loyalty.
Well, yes, that's definitely true, but it's three things at once. It's one, he doesn't believe in people working together to gain power. He believes that everybody individually has their own power, and that is what they have to use to try to grasp the starring role or the position in the play, right?
Yeah.
So while, I think you're right about him being chaotic in that way to us prospectively, his mindset's actually one of balance. He thinks that everything has an order. And I think that is scary because he thinks everything's preordained in that way, right? That there's people who are, able to seize their fates and those who aren't, and that we have to figure out who those are. And if people aren't capable of doing it, then that's fine. He killed his entire, squad coming into this because of that mentality,
He also is very much a character that has an interesting relationship with, yet again, they're mentioned in this phase, the observers. We get multiple moments of dialogue where Ceci is directly almost talking to the sky, to the observers, and it's just like, are you impressed by my amazing play? You know, it very much feels like Ceci in opposition to Subaru trying to defy fate. Ceci is trying to play to fate's whims in some.
Another thing I was going to add is, I definitely agree with that, but he also embodies Vlakia's ethos the most of any character, which makes sense because he's the strongest of Vlakia, which is that he believes that everybody grasps their own sort of strength, that sort of, idea of, the strong begets the strong and everyone else, can't grasp
Might
their
makes
fate.
right.
Yeah, might makes right. What's the word? It's the, idea that you can pull yourself up above your bootstraps, that type of thing.
Self-reliance.
No, it's meritocracy. Yeah, he's the most. The proponent of meritocracy the most of anybody that we've seen thus far, in a way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he also just kind of embodies the themes of Wallachia as well. As you're saying, he plays to the observers, which has been like a heavy influence in all this so far with them and the stargazers as such. Him being just this force of power, entirely self-reliant, and earning his way to being this incredibly dangerous individual with no regard for anyone else, which seems to just be as you said, the ethos of Wallachia as a whole. Although I would not argue, but make the point that I also think Todd is like the embodiment of that on his own as well.
Yes.
Just with someone who isn't as powerful as Cecilus is.
Right. And I mean, the thing about Todd's thing is that it is the truth of it all, which is the darkness of it, I would say. He's the darkness of Wallachia laid bare.
Yeah, like Cecilus is what you would put on there to be like, hey, if you are just strong enough, you could be just like this guy.
Yeah, he's the banner. He's the bannerman. That's the reason why he's the number one general. He's supposed to be the person that everyone sees and is like, oh yeah, the system must be working properly because this guy is number one.
And
you know what I mean?
It's a case of everyone hates him, and yet everyone respects him as number one, right?
Right. Yeah, he has no actual friends. He has nobody who actually talks to him or cares about him because he's so understandable, is what people kind of probably presume about him. So when Subaru is kind of trying to actually talk to him, he's like, wow, people are actually trying to tell me what to do, or people are actually trying to ask me what I think about the situation. Wow, it's crazy. Nobody ever does that.
That's actually... Go ahead, because mine's a transition.
It's an interesting point as well when we talk about fate and how he views his life, when he is one of the few characters in the series that just accepts his death in one of these loops.
Mm-hmm.
He willingly accepts his death as a part of fate, as a thing that he shouldn't fight against and he is not afraid of. And it terrifies Subaru.
Yeah, it's the Roswellian quality of it.
Yeah.
I also want to say that I kind of pieced this together just now, which is I think Cecilus wants to be the Sword Saint, if that makes sense.
Oh,
because
that's what his heavenly sword is.
Yes, he wants to grab the Dragon Sword raid. I think the reason why I believe that is because of his talk to the observers. If the observer is the one who gave the Sword God blessing to Reinhardt and the Van Astrea family and stuff like that, if all those blessings are conferred onto people by the observers, and Cecilus talking about how he wants to be the starring role, in this world, I believe the starring role, as ordained by the observers, must be Reinhardt. So by Cecilus trying to reach that heavenly sword, he probably believes that heavenly sword is the Dragon Sword Raid, because it is a supreme blade beyond all supreme blades. It is the will of the world spoken through. It can reset the world, it can give it rebirth, it can do whatever, right? And I think that is part of his ambition.
I think that is a very reasonable theory. I can.
He wants to be the puppet of those people, because that would mean that he's a leading actor,
and that would put him also I guess in another way, directly in opposition to Reinhardt's like solemn duty of his heroism, right? Where Reinhardt has literally no self-interest in his heroism. It is all duty, I'm following this. Whereas Cecilus wants that fate so deeply for himself that he's willing to fight for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only that, but Reinhardt truly does not want to be this way, but he can't help it. Every negative aspect of his life has been formed around his responsibility, And somebody like Cecilus wouldn't care because he has no connections with other people. He doesn't try to make friends, and nobody tries to make him his friend. Their friend, I should say. And because of that, I think it puts them at perfect opposition of one another. And I think that's one of the reasons why, they quarrel. I'm guessing, the strongest people of their country will eventually quarrel, I believe. And it'll be under the ambition that he will claim what Reinhard does not rightfully respect about himself, about how the fact that this guy is just a poser as the leading actor in the world is probably how Cecilus sees him. Because he's humble, he's, he doesn't care about his ambition. He doesn't have that sort of ego.
Just in general, what are your thoughts on Ceci as a character here?
Me?
Yeah, really for both of you.
Yeah, so for me, I honestly think that he is, how should I say this? His morality is, as Super kind of pointed out, is a fitting morality that he lives by, right? He does it properly. He doesn't half-ass anything or anything like that about his viewpoint, because his viewpoint is one in which everything has already been laid out. So there's no point in questioning at this point. He knows that he's the strongest, and he's going to live by everybody by that same sort of measuring stick. He did it with himself when he died in this arc.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he, because of that, has a vulnerability, right? Which is when somebody proves that they are able to do something more grandiose, more epic than he is subservient to that. If he thinks it's more fitting, right, that's actually the biggest issue, is the fact that things doesn't need to be right or wrong for him. They just need to seem more poetic, more literary, he will save somebody based on, he's like Subaru, right? In this arc, he saved them from the waters because it felt like it was a call to action from himself. He didn't save them because it was the right thing to do. He saved them because it was like, oh, this feels like it's preordained, like it's something I should do because it feels like it's something out of a story. I'm going to pick these guys out and see if they're actually, cool. It's the same when he's dying at the Sparka, and he's kind of like, guess you weren't what I thought you were. That's kind of sucks for you, right? And it's
an interesting point that without his intervention, time wouldn't have progressed there. So when Subaru is drowning in the lake over and over and over again, the only reason he gets out is because Ceci comes to save him.
Right.
So if he doesn't do that, Subaru's reset point is in the lake that he keeps drowning in. It's like that exact fear that he was afraid of at the end, where if he gets down to like 1 second, what happens?
Yeah, the infinite loop, right?
Mm-hmm. So he was in that until Cecilus does come to save him, because he mentions in the last phase that he had grabbed Tanza multiple times. But it wasn't until Ceci comes and save him, an outside intervention, that he gets out of the water. So I wonder if the observers are able to witness this, and if they have like some sort of way to, like, if Cecilus isn't just talking out of his ass, and he really does have like a feeling for this.
I'm going to take an interesting take on his character, in that I feel, in a way, he is sometimes Tepe's voice to the audience. I know that seems rather strange, but there are multiple moments throughout this phase where Ceci just mentions that this may not be the correct moral or just path, but this is the right path in a literary sense for the story to go, right? Like, as Gold's saying, that poeticism. I think in a way that's Tepe speaking to the audience and saying, Wallachia may not be the place you imagined that the story was going to take place at this point, but this is the right path for this story to go forward through. And that's almost like, I feel like Tepe is almost in a fourth wall breaking sense, saying, I know what you guys are thinking, but trust me, let me cook. Do you know what I mean?
True.
I think that meta narrative is important. I also think that, Cecilus, he, as we're talking about the contrast between him and Subaru, is the fact that, like, as you said before, if Cecilus does he have a way to confer with observers? I think it's a keen intuition brought about not by some sort of actual connection, but by his senses being so supernatural that he's able to see the exact right thing to do in a situation. That's probably why he's so strong, right? Because if he sees everything from this mentality of, I am a character in a story, which is meta, right? Obviously, then I will sort of be the strongest, right? Yeah. Because if I keep on doing the right things, if an author was penning me right now, what would be the coolest thing that I could do, right? That is a mentality that Cecilus has, and as such, it aids to his strength, right? And Subaru himself isn't that strong intrinsically, as we saw through, all the time he dies throughout this arc, but because, his resets, he's able to alter and align with Cecilus's instincts about what would be the coolest thing for him to do, you know? And I think that's the reminder that we get all the time when Cecilus is like, wow, you did great. Like we see him, that's why we see him so positively throughout this arc, is because, you know, Subaru eventually aligns with what Cecilus and the observers probably want for the world in a way, because, you know, they're able to move forward.
So you go ahead.
One last thing
Mine's a finishing thought.
Because you also just asked opinions on his character in general. I think we've talked a lot about what he means, like in terms of themes and what his character is saying. But when it comes to how I view him in terms of like if I like him or not, I find him very entertaining. He is a character I don't think we've had in the story yet, where we've had Roswell, right, who's trying to manipulate Subaru into a certain way and is playing games with fate, and he has like a higher view than a lot of the other characters do. But we've not had a character yet, I feel, like Ceci, who is having as much fun with the story as we are in a really interesting meta, but also like very like I can't help but like this guy way, because even though he's annoying and there's moments of his dialogue where I literally visibly like roll my eyes because of how silly it is, I can't help but just want to see more dialogue interactions between him and Subaru, because there's just so many interesting moments where I think, especially at the end of this phase, it's proven where Subaru just kind of understands Ceci at the end, and he's like, because he doesn't, the impression is, right, at the end, that he never asked for Ceci's help when he did all of those other events as he did them. Mm-hmm. And he did that understanding that Ceci would find that the most amusing, as he does. He literally cries tears of amusement of how hard he laughs at the end of this phase. I really like him. He's really interesting. And I can't wait for him to betray us in some way and me hate him.
Gold, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's interesting too, but obviously this is infant self, his childish self. I'm sure there's another degree of his personality that we haven't honed in on yet. And of course there's the way in which, right, like a character like him, there's a lot of times where we impress him and he relents at moments where he's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right, this is kind of fun, or this is funny, or I'm not going to do this because I'm just waiting, I'm just bored or whatever. But if there's a moment in which this character has a second degree to him, in which he's like, no, but I actually have a conviction to do something with this leading actor mentality that I have, then it becomes more dangerous, because then he is biased in a way that he doesn't seem to be here. Because right now it seems like he's genuinely appraising the situation as it comes, but the moment it falls out of his favor, or the moment he has a reason to favor something else, that is when he becomes more dangerous. So yeah, I think he's an interesting character because of that, because I think he's not written in a, I would say, like an impossible way. Like his personality and the way that he talks and the way that he interacts with people is sort of just normal-ish, right? In a sense, where he is being as honest as possible and appraising them as truthfully as possible. And that like lack of duplicitous nature does make me like him more, but we'll definitely have friction with him in the future.
Oh yeah. He for me is a character that he embodies that he's not a foe, he's not an ally, right? He again, as I mentioned, is a wild card, but not in the way that a lot of other wild cards are in stories, where it's like he's playing against fate. He's playing towards his own fate, and that's what makes him the wild card, because you never know what action he's going to take next. And that adds a fun element to the story of, we have a really strong character that can change the entire scope of what happens in the story on his whims. And that makes him a force of personality in itself, right?
Sure.
The other thing I will mention about him, and this is aside from the meta-narrative stuff where he talks about being the main character, in the other way that he embodies the Valachian ideal, when he's calling people side characters and main characters, he's almost talking to as if like these are the leaders of fate in this time. Like how he mentions that all of the rest of Subaru's unit are just puny side characters. In that way, they like are side characters that defend the great main story of Subaru's story in this phase in some ways. And it leads to that idea of, I think, that he views the world through this lens, but in a way he's almost making a statement on who is like shaping the world and who is a follower instead of a leader, right?
Sure. I can say that for my view of him, I was immensely let down by him. because I remember reading and seeing people so excited to see Cecilus in the story and either like really loving him or being really frustrated by him. And to me, he's just kind of there. Like there, as Gold mentioned, there's some interest to it, and his dialogue can sometimes be entertaining. But like, I didn't really get the hype that people were building around him.
And I
so
honestly, yeah. Sorry, go ahead if you want.
I'm wondering if his existence in the Wrath or the is it Wrath or Pride? One of the two. I think it's Wrath. His existence in the Wrath if was coloring a lot of people's view of him as a character. Like they were wanting to wait for, oh, this awesome character from this other story is going to show up, like expecting a crossover episode almost.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, like
Where I'm reading this guide, and I'm just like, he's just kind of, whenever he was really getting into the character and like the play and performance stuff, I was more annoyed than anything else because it just didn't hit. But I also didn't get to the degree that Abel was talking about of he's incomprehensible and no one likes him. It was just sort of, he's an annoying person. And that's about like the extent of it to me.
Yeah, and the perception of that actually is something that we can touch upon, I think, just now a little bit. And I just want to go ahead and kind of see if I can commiserate with some of you about this part, which is the fact that I think they're doing, like, I think Tepe is doing this on purpose, and let me know if you agree with this or you get the same sense that I do, which is that these people in Vlachia who seem to be the strongest, their personalities are plainly muted because to them, the acts of being strong or the acts of violence is the luxury in which that they can exist their own petty existences. Like, I think both Cecilus and Archaea in this arc, especially, or this phase especially, showcases how pitiful they are because of just how like they're missing the point. Like none of them, they don't, like, their ideals don't matter in the face of their grand strength that they have, to the point in which that they can amuse themselves with these petty sort of ideas. Or like in Archaea's case, and we'll get to that later, I just think that she is so placated by her past that she is just like, she sees herself just as a simple slave or soldier, and she doesn't really perceive how important she is.
I can't say why this is true, but I just want to point out, Gold, I think you're really right on the money with it, and it is a definitely an intentional thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyways, want to move on to the next part now that we got over. I think we talked about everything about Cecilus right now. Anything else you want to say?
There was one minor detail that I was wondering if you guys picked up, that he does mention his past, like his
he said
family
something
situation.
Dad, yeah, he's like, hey, he said something like on Carmen, and was like, what are you even talking about? Where he's like, I'm definitely not the older brother, because if I was the older brother, I'd have been killed, right? Or did he say that the younger brother would have been killed? Either way,
he said that he can't have an older brother because then they would have been killed, but he can't be an older brother because then he would have been killed by his dad.
Yeah, exactly.
The one-child policy.
I shouldn't have been drinking at that point. Oh my god, that hurts.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to. I'm not gonna lie. Ever since I read that moment, all I can think of is one-child policy.
Yeah, I don't. That's actually a good question. I don't really know what it means. But I'm like thinking either it has something to do with his strength or it has something to do with his father that we don't know yet. But we'll see. It is curious. It could be like a curse thing. It could be a secret to his strength. But we'll go ahead.
Like his power is split up amongst him and all of his siblings.
Well, that's the thing. It's like we have a character already in the story who's like that, who is, my power is split amongst multiple of myselves or whatever. But instead it's the reverse. But no, like I don't.
Well, that's kind of how the the imperial family works as well. That their whole thing is that there can only be one left.
Yeah,
the Yang sword becomes like maybe it's super powerful if there's only like one left, right?
It makes me think of either his father is either kind because he didn't want to give the fate that the Valachian imperial family has of having lots of kids and then forcing them to kill each other, or he's fucked up and doesn't have other kids precisely because he doesn't want challenges to his power or something to that degree.
That could be it too, but it could also be this idea that his father probably like only has like one like he has a technique, and he's like, hey, I only have enough time to teach one of you, and I don't want to teach multiple people because it's super strong. And if you learn it, hey, I'm not gonna. I have only time. I only have time for one brat to deal with. Okay, I'm not gonna deal with multiple or something like that. But I don't know how fucked up it would be, but it'd be like a weird parallel to Heinkel in a way, where it's instead of Heinkel wanting desperately to be a part of a family, maybe Cecilus' father doesn't even want to have a kid at all,
Possible.
or if to make a clone of himself, right? Like a completely selfish reason.
On the topic before we move on, then, I guess I'd just like to mention one last funny thing I found about Cecilus, which was just a very entertaining detail to paper at the beginning of the phase, which is when Ceci gives Subaru the nickname Basu, and Subaru feels like he has to repay the favor and call him Ceci. He freaks out because it's the first nickname he's ever gotten in his life.
That's true. I forgot about that detail. That is a good detail.
He is the first pet name of affection he's ever had, and that makes me very sad.
Well, that's also a callback to Arc 2, where he gives Roswell and Rom nicknames, and they have to even ask what that is. Which is an interesting point that they don't know what a nickname is in Lagunica, but apparently they do in Wallachia.
Well, they have monikers all the time. I think that's something, the blank general, that type of thing. The blue lightning is what he calls himself.
They do like have more epithets there. That's true.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I just want to say about this arc, his Lollymancer title is becoming more and more true.
Yes.
As time goes on. Because now I see Tanza gonna be like, oh, I really like Subaru-sama because he was so kind to me.
Schwartz-sama? Sorry,
yes.
Schwartz. This is his fourth identity this arc?
Yeah, really. It's so funny. And at least it kind of peels together neatly, where it's like, not Sumi Schwartz. Okay, he's just saying Natsuki Schwartz. Oh, okay. So the Schwartz parts is the only thing that he's changing here, so it's not too complicated.
I guess we'll discuss that a bit more as we get to probably the Subaru section of this podcast, eh?
Yeah, that's a good point. So post Ceci then, I think the good part to start here are like the first real thing that we get for this arc that gets followed up of the Sparkas, and like the way that Return by Death is used here, and introducing to the new squad.
Yeah, the squad!
So I already mentioned earlier that I do really like Whites. I don't know what it was about him just in these first few loops, but I just attached to him so quickly. And
cool design.
It is a cool design, for sure. Also, him just looking out for Natsuki Schwartz here at the beginning is also just partly endearing, that he does try and help him out at least a bit before he gets to know him.
He has the most reasonable character out of all of the people in there, the little group.
He's the most, I would say, from our like modern world perspective, the most morally good person.
Yeah, and like none of them are bad people. Well, we do get to see through the rampant amount of named chapters we get this phase.
Yes. Yeah. Really interesting format for these named chapters too, where it's not always on focus of the named character, but when it is on their focus, it's a really important moment for their character.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked really well. I love the new unit, the crew that was introduced here with Idra, Waits, and Hyan. Really diverse cast of characters, and all because when you at first meet them, right, they're kind of like a despicable crew. Like your first impression of them is that these are just awful criminal people, right?
Yeah, like a liar, cutthroat, and a coward. Like that's what they said. Yeah.
And Subaru gets that impression too. And then as we go through the loops of this first Sparka, we grow to see these guys just. We learn each through the narration of the chapter that this first Sparka is written in, by the way, is one of my favorite chapters of the arc, and maybe of ReZero in general.
Oh, 100%.
It's called Magic Words, I believe. And it is phenomenally written. Like, the structure of this chapter is just so good. We learn like each through these different attempts that Subaru's doing, there is no wasted information. All of the loops we miss, we get the information that we would have learned from those loops in the loops we see, and it feels really tight and well written. And we learn,
definitely.
We learn the backstories of all of these characters. How White's is actually like a golden heart behind all of those tattoos, and the reason he has them is just to make people scared of him, so they won't bother him. And Hyun was abandoned by his friends, and he was used as bait, and that's why he's so distrusting of everyone and doesn't work together really well. So Subaru has to trick him into working with them. And how Idra is a liar, right? And he says that he's a great warrior that's here to conquer, when in reality he's a man that's had everything taken from him, and he wants to put on that strong front.
Yeah, because he realized that the reason why he was taken advantage of is because he wasn't a warrior, so he wants to pretend that he is one.
Because he was not a warrior in the nation of Wallachia. That was his sin,
had
right?
to,
At least from a cultural understanding of Wallachian people, that was a sin for him, right?
Yeah, it's also just like a really good points of continuing the aspect of every male character in this series foils Subaru in some way, and that these three all have an aspect to them that Subaru doesn't particularly like about himself, that he's not a great fighter. He is like a scaredy cat a lot of the time. He does get freaked out and terrified by things. And even like with White's having like the scary appearance goes all the way back to Subaru's first insecurity of his Senpaku eyes. And that he just gets to work through them and is able to relate to them both through that and through the shared experience that he has to do over and over and over and over again. Which I like the process of Return by Death being used on a short-term basis here so much more than I did with the 11 Seconds of Hell.
Yes.
Because here it feels like each time this feels like he got stuck with just a really shitty restart point and is having to make the best of it and make each death count. Whereas the 11 Seconds of Hell just felt borderline torture porn.
I think it's the difference in what he's fighting, right? Like, 11 Seconds of Hell is the proof that not only is the world cruel, but Wallachia in particular is a cruel, terrible place where old men murder children, you know? And this first Sparka is almost, even though it's really tragic in how much suffering Subaru has to go to, it's also a triumphant moment for Subaru, right? Where he's uniting people together. He's building a team of people that trust him in such a short period of time for their perspective.
Yeah, because in their mind, it's just they got thrown in there with this kid who knows everything about them and is the perfect leader right away.
Right away. Because again, and this builds on the thing some of the themes we've seen through the entirety of ReZero's. Nobody apart from Echidna sees Subaru as the Subaru that fails. It's only ever the Subaru that succeeds, right?
And this confidence, because of his younger self, it kind of means that he's willing to throw himself back in and be, reckless and stuff like that. And one of the things, that I we were talking about earlier is that, this would be an awesome anime episode as well, because I'm just thinking about like how easy it could be to cut together all the failed attempts with the culminating in the successful one, and how cool that would feel and look like. It also, like, it was cool just like how, like he kept on getting like torn apart or whatever. It just failed just barely, and then thrown up to the stands with Cecilus, and then just like he's like one more time, and he kept on like shouting that out, and it was just like he kept on, and like it's incomprehensible to anybody there, but like to us, the audience, it feels like such like a a heroic and triumphant and commendable thing. This like spirit, like unbreakable, like just keep on charging forward. And it's a bit different, as we'll see later in the arc. It's a bit different than the idea of doing it inhumanely, like Echidna wants him to, restarting over and over again. He's mindful of that still. He still feels the pain. We still see how gruesomely he dies, and yet he's able to culminate it all in this amazing, finale, which I think felt really earned and really like well paced, well done.
Yeah.
Succinctly communicated. And I really liked the arc or this chapter. Yeah.
This chapter and the first Sparka was just it. I think it's a showing of what I love about ReZero, where there's such an on the surface insurmountable challenge, right? And Subaru, it has every right within his life to just give up, like well and truly give up and just absolutely give in to despair. But
Yeah, but this is the son of Kenichi Natsuki.
this is the son of Kenichi Natsuki. This
Or
is
Natsuki.
the child.
Shit, I flipped it. Damn it. I've been so good about that. Ugh.
Kenichi.
Natsuki
That's
Kenichi.
fine.
Yeah, this is that guy's kid. He can do anything. He can get through
Right.
this. He can overcome it. And I know that Wolf and I were talking about this before, after he first read this chapter. But do you think that older Subaru, like proper Natsuki Subaru, could have gotten out of this situation in fewer attempts than the kid could have?
Fewer interesting. Maybe, but I do think that it's about the attitude that he did it. That was probably it probably would have been more thoughtful of a plan, but I don't think it would have been as quick, maybe. Right. I think Natsuki, he would definitely be able to do it, but I think, yeah, maybe this one just kept throwing his head at the wall until he convinced everybody that he had the right plan, you know? So I think that attitude meant that he hesitated less. He was more confident in his approach. So yeah, I think maybe younger. I think in this situation, I think younger Subaru. I don't think all situations would be better if he was younger, obviously, but I think this might have been the one.
I think
I
think him being. Go ahead. I'll just let you go.
So I think Natsuki Subaru, as we knew him in the story, would have done this in fewer attempts, but I think the outcome would have been less, not perfect, but less optimal.
Resonant with everybody there.
In the sense of the son of Natsuki Kenichi, Natsuki Subaru, Natsuki Schwartz, is the person that, even though he's going to fail more times in this scenario, his outcome for this scenario is a lot more potent and important to the people around him, I think. Because the impact of him having the expectations of him being a child and everyone distrusting him, right? If he wasn't a child, everyone would have grown to like trust him a lot quicker in these loops. But Subaru wouldn't have grown to have as close a bond with these people. Subaru would not have grown to have that triumphant moment as this child that no one expects to win to blow their socks off. And that's why it's important that it's Natsuki Kenichi's son that does these loops and not Natsuki Subaru, I think.
Fair. That's actually a really good point. I agree that I think Subaru could have done this in fewer attempts, because he would then have like full knowledge and understanding of like his abilities. He barely makes use of this phase until the very end.
Yeah.
And could have made more use of them, such as trying to either invoke the taboo to lure the mob beast over to him rather than the main one with the weapon, and could have made use of that against the fence, or had a more charismatic approach to it, like, I'm a knight of Lagunica, I faced witch beasts with fewer allies and less weapons, we can do this situation and come out on top. I think he would have been able to do it in fewer attempts, just like the younger him believes that to be the case.
Yeah, I think one thing about this arc that's very, the distinguishing factor here is only the mentality. In reality, this version of Subaru is actually worse off. In any conceivable notion, he's less strong, he's less thoughtful, he's less considerate. But the real advantage that he has, not only the thing that we'll talk about later, which is, the thing about, him being younger, being perfect for Vincent's plan, but also, like, the idea of, if this was regular Subaru, his mentality would be a hindrance in a lot of scenarios here. I just think his reservations that he hasn't come up with, the reason why we're seeing this version of Subaru, I think, as an audience, is because we're starting to realize a lot of Subaru's failings in his mentality, and the reason why his sort of, self, I would say deprecating viewpoint on himself is actually a hindrance when he can do all of these great things. He can lead, he can, prove to people that he has great plans, he can make quick friends, he can inspire people. And we've seen this throughout this arc so far. And I think, like, normal Subaru would be too caught up in his head about, the mechanics of a situation, or being honest, doing things the way that he'd want to do it, right? In a way that, we see even in this arc that he's like, I don't know what to do if I can't do it the way that I want to do it, But that was a more of a childish longing rather than a logical one. I think Subaru would have been very stubborn this arc about, like, I can't lie to these people, we'll just make things worse getting out there. What if this X, Y, or Z, right? But this time around, he just took things as they came, by the horns. He didn't really care about dying. He didn't care about anything.
I I will also posit here, whilst I think that in the mechanics of if he, like, the normal Subaru was here, he would have been able to do this in fewer loops. I think the Subaru we left off before infantilization might have been close to giving up in some of these loops, like genuinely. I think we needed the son of Natsuki Kenichi here, specifically because he needs that mentality to beat these scenarios. Because I'm going to be real, Subaru gets close to giving up at the end of this phase, but I expected him to start trying to give up a lot earlier. The only thing that got him through was him believing he was the strongest existence, the son of his father, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think without that, Subaru would have been in a lot of trouble here.
Well, part of it, I think, as well, is that he has now gotten, like, the Subaru that we left off with before he got regressed wasn't Subaru. At that point, it was Natsumi, which is another persona he was putting on as this, like,
Protective
maximized
layer.
vision of a hero, right? Like, this is what he wants to be. Like, Natsumi doesn't fail. Natsumi is, like, the successful hero.
Natsumi is...
Whereas, yeah, like, and that was his escape to that. Where before, the Subaru he was so single-mindedly focused on just achieving one specific goal. Like, that Subaru would have... I think he might have made it out of this first Sparka alive. I don't think he gets the rest of the crew out.
Yeah.
And he definitely doesn't, like, befriend Gustav or anything.
Yeah, 100%. I also think, like, one part of this that we're also considering is the fact that, you know, Subaru's fragile, but also, like, he as his adult self is single-minded. He doesn't want to be here. He doesn't like this place so much that he would just rather not deal with these people.
He never would have used Abel's plan and lie.
Never.
Yeah. He's like, that is wrong. Like, he would be like, this isn't something that's good for Amelia, this is good for the camp, this is good for me. I don't want to see this through. Why would I want to help and save these people that I don't care about? Well, like, he cares obviously about the people at the Shudrak village and stuff like that, but he wouldn't be like, hey, we need to help, we need to fall in line with Vincent's plan and stuff like that. We need to save everybody here. He's just doing this because he has to. It was a necessity to him, And now that he's in the state, it's more like, okay, let's see what I can do. It's just more of this gung-ho, childish attitude. I think it's supposed to, like, show. I think one part of it is like, hey, a lot of Subaru's, faults right now are because of these hang-ups that at a time weren't there because it was imposed on him as he grew up. And some of them are better than others. Some of them are more right than others. But a lot of his hang-ups are just stopping him from realizing his true potential.
Yes.
And
I think
Which I think does come to a head at the end of this phase as well, of him, like, really realizing what all he has available to him, and that making everything go so much easier in a single attempt.
Help, yeah.
In that in a really interesting turn of events, right, that we kind of reconnect to Subaru's prodigal side here, of, like, him, like, we see that faltering through the climax of this phase, and then it's, like, reinstated right at the end because of, like, that reaffirmation he gets. And it makes me really think that Subaru needs this to get to the point where he can be that prodigy again. Even if he's not in the exact same way as the child Natsuki Subaru is, he will, when he's fully back to his adult self, I think this experience will help him come to terms and become that prodigy again. And then in the future arcs, we may have a problem where Subaru goes too far in his self-confidence and becomes prideful and fucks up. That's just my theory for how the main story is going to go. But yeah,
right. And I definitely want to talk about, like, what the end of this phase means, but before we kind of get into that, I do want to discuss the second Sparka as the follow-up to this and my issues and criticisms concerning it.
Yeah,
go for it.
So I think the first Sparka, great way to kind of reinvent how Return by Death is being used, especially expanding on what happened with the 11 Seconds of Hell, and even, like, the loop with Olbart, where things were stressful, he didn't have a lot of time to react, and making every second count to as much as he possibly can. I think him going into the second Sparka, or getting into the situation that forces him to be in it, which is really what he does end up doing here, in order to try the same thing again and get these other people who we don't even really properly meet.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, we don't.
Feels like a betrayal of the story to me, in that it is the only time where it feels like Subaru is directly and purposely throwing his life away.
Right. Well, one part of it as well, and we'll get to that later. I mean, I think it rectifies itself a bit with the poison thing, and we'll explain it.
Yes.
It's
To a
the
degree, but he was still trying to do it the other way, and that's what bothered me about it.
well, I think one of the things is, and I know I understand your feeling, and it's, hey, this series is very deliberate and detail orientated. The fact that I think it was partially, I think this is my perception. DePay didn't want us to have to read this part. He wanted to give you an idea about what what's his name? Whatever his name is,
Eon.
the guy, Hyun's deal was, and he wanted to give a good reason for Hyun to care, even though he's a coward, about Natsuki Schwartz, right? But
Hmm.
he wanted to give it like a good, convincing reason that also illustrates, the fact that, oh, well, let's try this in a different way. Okay, so instead of it being like they're all convinced at the same time, instead his, we get the reveal that he was left behind by these people, and then Subaru figures out a way to try to hone in on that help and try to be this childish hero that he probably thinks himself as, and then it kind of lines serendipitously where he's helping people, and all we see is the after effects. We don't see the reckless abandon of what why would you do that? That, like, everybody there is like, hey, why would you do that? You're risking your own life. What's the point, right? Like, why would you do that for people that you don't know? And I mean, we get the answer to that later in the arc, is that he'd feel bad if even just a single person he wasn't able to save, right? Even if he could with his power, right?
Right.
So
My issue is not with Subaru as a character making this decision in character, because I 100% believe that that is what he would have done here. My issue is honestly with Tappei putting that situation into the story to have Subaru then make that decision, because that feels like a massive betrayal of what they did and set up in Arc 4, then reestablished in Arc 6, of the importance of his life as a whole, and that it is a life, that it is a death, and the people
yeah,
around
yeah,
him
yeah.
are that. Where here it feels like he almost backpedaling when he went in, not retcon, but established later that the poison wasn't an instant kill.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. I agree with that too. But I think it was supposed to be a hand wave of a moment anyways, narratively, right? But then I think what kind of solidifies the okayness of it in my mind, which is just like, I don't feel good about it, I don't feel bad about it either. The reason why I feel okay about it is because it's like, I think that it could all be hand waved by just saying that the infantilization technique is causing him not to think too heavily about things that he as an adult would think heavily
No,
about.
right.
Yeah.
I don't, again, have any issue with Subaru doing this, like, from Subaru. My problem is honestly with Tappei writing this in
Yeah, yeah.
as the way to have Hyun do this, because you could have established Hyun's issues and resolved them in the Todd portion. Like, have everyone leave Hyun in one of the loops, and Subaru has to address that that doesn't mean that that's who they really are. And then in the next one of those loops, he gets to see that that's about to happen, and or is on the other side of that and figure
Yeah.
out like what it all is, or give Hyun the chance to see that when people did leave him, maybe they come back in that same loop to rescue him and Subaru at the end, only for it to be fruitless later. But
Well, I
just
think
the inclusion of having him do this a second time, with it being all off screen for the sake of character development that could have been done elsewhere, really, really bothered me.
Yeah, I think the real answer to your question is, I don't think Tappei cared enough about Hyun's arc to give him, at the time at least, I don't know if this is true later, to give him a satisfying narrative conclusion that felt in congruence with the rest of the narrative conclusions that the story has to give to side characters and the way that they self-actualize themselves or have their own heroic moments. Here it's like, yeah, Subaru deals with it, and now, yeah, they're loyal. That's about it.
I have a different criticism of the second Sparker. On the topic of its inclusion in the story, I'm 50-50 in what I feel about it, where I do not mind its inclusion because I think it points out that even though we have the prodigy Natsuki Subaru, right, he has still got some deep and bad character flaws that our Subaru has. And that specifically is the self-sacrifice element, and that he is, in a lot of ways, you know how in the early arcs, Emilia has big issue with how Subaru breaks his promises, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel this is to pay. What he's trying to say here is that even though we have the prodigy Natsuki Subaru, that doesn't mean we're not going to get more character development after this phase with how that works and his ideas about what he does, especially with the poison. I think it reinforced to me that this is a showing of Subaru doing something wrong. And whilst I understand how you feel about it, Connor, and I think it's a very valid feeling, I don't feel the same way. My major criticism with this is I don't mind not seeing a lot of it. We don't see a single loop from it. And that is my problem. And the reason my problem is with that is I think it would have been way more effective of a storytelling device if we saw at least one loop where he uses the poisoning on himself. And I think that would have made it less sour for me, if that makes any sense. Because even though we get moments where we don't, like, specifically at the end of this phase, we don't see all of the other moments Subaru does to get to that point. We don't see all of the loops. We at least see one of the loops in a lot of these situations in a way that makes structural sense. I think the inclusion of not even a single one here feels wrong. And it doesn't get across the message Tappei is trying to say by adding the story beat in, for me at least.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like the Subaru dying there. Like, because that's what this part feels like. Either Tappei forgot in this moment or just decided to not enforce as much, is that he as a character is dying dozens if not hundreds of times off screen for a bunch of characters that aren't relevant to the story at all.
Yes.
That he could have just not put here and still gotten the same story beats across in a different way without even using up as much. That's why it bothered me and rubbed me the wrong way. And to the extent that it did, the fact that it doesn't come back. Like, he's not... The furthest criticism of this decision we get is when we finally see the poison in effect of almost like Subaru narrating to himself saying, like, there's never an easy way and I have to remind myself for that. But he went to the doctor looking for that easy way.
Right. But no, I think it's supposed to be... I mean, I know what you mean. I think it's supposed to be Tappei realizing his mistake while he's writing it. And you're right, like, self-justifying it in retrospect, being like, hey, I know... Like, he probably kind of had a dawning realization of, like, wait, am I really saying that Subaru is just going to start restarting over and over again without any pain, as if poison is unpainful, as if any death is unpainful, as if that's not a lesson that he had to learn in, like, Arc 4, that every death is painful? Like, the idea of that is, like, we're putting this to rest, but we're also making it... And I really like that scene in general, so maybe that's just my bias talking about the scene.
I like that scene as it is. Yes, I was just... My only problem is the inclusion of the second Sparka. I just wish it hadn't been there. That's ultimately my criticism of the arc. Because that is the low point so far of all of the web novel that I've read up until now, is this second Sparka. Because it just feels so much like out of character for Tappei to have this here. It just doesn't feel like it fits with the way that the rest of the story is written. And it doesn't return that way either. Like, it never comes back, and he doesn't do things like that again, at least to where I'm at, which is it just feels so bizarre to me. So that's my, I'll get off my soapbox. That's my rant on the second Sparka, because I adore everything after it so much.
I guess,
and
would we discuss the climax itself as, like, a topic here, maybe?
I think we should go to Todd first.
Todd first, yes.
Yeah.
So we get the epitome, the pinnacle, peak Todd here with Arakia as his weapon. And it's... I cannot express how terrified I was when it was revealed that Todd is who showed up the second time the bridge raised. Because I know that you got, like, a mini spoiler with that on the art for that chapter.
Yes.
I didn't see the art for that. So when he does finally show up and you get to see who it is, like, there was just this tension building, and I remember feeling like, who's here? Who could be here? It's not going to be Vincent. Is it, like, Chisha? Is it Kafma Irelux?
It's
someone else? And no, it's like, it is the worst possible person to have come here. And I was so excited and so terrified, and man, that terror was justified, because the loops and shit he put Subaru and everyone through here just shows why he is the best antagonist in ReZero.
Horrifying. And as Subaru says, this is worse than any Archbishop. This is worse than any, because just like the sight, even like the art of like Todd walking through and there's just everybody's dead around him and he's just like waiting and he's just like, oh, you're alive, okay. Like there is nothing more unnerving than the efficiency and lack of care Todd has to everything that he does. Like, this is just a checklist that he has to check off where he goes home.
Yes.
This is all it is to him. And he does it with such cruel, cold efficiency and violence. Like, it's gross and it's dark and there's not a single shred of hesitation or remorse on his face. And he doesn't even think about it. And it's such a striking image when he shows up for the first time here.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is most effective about Todd as an antagonist is that he foils Subaru like I don't think any other character has in the series yet, where he is similar to Subaru in the sense of his circumstances, of he is constantly in danger. He's not necessarily a strong person, quote unquote.
He's not.
But he has to deal with scenarios in a similar way to Subaru. But he takes the opposite approach to Subaru, where Subaru believes his bonds and the people around him is what helps him get through things, and that in itself is his purpose and love, right? But for Todd, the people around him are obstacles and annoyances.
Yeah.
And they're challenges to overcome. I think the thing that illustrates this the most for me is there's a scene after which I will illustrate this and then illustrate this further, where we get the warden of the island, Gustav, who is, by the way, a relative of Kurgan, which is cool.
Yeah, the armed tribe,
Yeah, and the whole point of being there is that they're trying to get that cursed tool that Gustav has that can apply death to anyone that leaves the radius of the island or anyone he chooses within the island if he chooses to activate it, right?
Well, that's what he says. I don't actually know if it can be targeted or not. I think that's what Subaru caught on to when he was like calling Gustav's bluff, so that he can't just kill him. I think the curse is an all or nothing thing.
Yeah, but that's what I mean in the sense of like using it, like it just even the conscious use of it, apart from like leaving its radius, right? Which, but when Gustav refuses, Todd kills him, and I expected that to happen because that's the response Todd would make in the situation. But then we get a moment where Subaru, who's hiding with Hyun, who's been in this room and looped so many times to get this scenario right because Todd and Arakia have found him because they're freaks.
So he knew how to layer all the things.
Yeah.
Just enough distractions that they wouldn't pursue, but just enough distractions that they'd not look their way.
Yeah.
Enough sense being hidden,
They're
enough whatever.
probably trying to find the perfect spot too. I imagine the spot changed through each loop until they found that specific spot on the bookcase. But the regardless of that, there's a moment at the end of that chapter where they've escaped and they've got the cursed tool. And you see a moment with Todd in the room alone by himself, and he clicks his tongue to himself and says, "Oh, this is so annoying. Whoever said this was an easy mission is lying. Such a brat." And I think it illustrates to me just how unpersonal everything is to Todd, right? There's not a real emotion behind that besides annoyance, and not in like an angry way, in a I've got to spend more time doing this. He has so little care for the people around him that it's just oh, well, looks like we're doing a detour. I'm gonna have to get my hands dirty. Oh well.
Yeah, I know
he doesn't care about anyone other than him and his fiance.
Yeah.
Exactly. I would say, in the way that you said it's impersonal, it is highly personal in a way.
In the same way, yeah.
Yeah, because to him, everything's about him and his situation. It's like, this is stopping me from doing this. Your death or life or how quick you die is, he's like, I don't care how you die. Like, he says to Subaru, he's like, I don't really care the way that you die as long as you die, okay? Yeah.
There's a really cool moment which I think just shows his opposition to Subaru, in that there's a part of Todd's narration where he says he will make any sacrifices necessary to go back to his fiancée, and that is so antithesis to Subaru, who will make any sacrifices to save those around him, right?
Yeah,
you know,
Todd is Arc 4 Roswell's wet dream.
Yes,
exactly.
yes, exactly.
100%. That's why I said he's like Roswell in the. I mean, sorry. There's a sense of I made the connection with Cecilus and Roswell earlier, but yeah, the idea is that like his impersonal nature allows him to do the cruelest things to get the outcome he desires, right? And I do agree that he is dislike Subaru in the fact that Subaru wants to save everybody, right? But to Subaru and Todd, they both have in their mind, like in this arc especially, Subaru's like, I don't really care about Vlaki, I don't care about anything. I just want to get back to Amelia, right? Like that's the sort of reason why they both have these similar desires. They're like, I just need to see that girl. That's what Todd is thinking. I need to see Katya. And earlier in the arc, Subaru was like, I don't care about anything going on here. I just need to make it back to Amelia as soon as possible, and Beatrice.
Or just save Rem.
Yeah, or just save Rem, right? And I think that's the reason why they're contrasted so well together, is because we see the difference very keenly, especially right now in this arc where, Subaru's like despairing over a guard's death, he's despairing over one person's death, Gustav's death. And that sort of way of thinking. And I just want to touch upon this really quickly. We'll get to it in a second, I think. But the way that Subaru kind of picks up on this, and it's so true, is the fact that when Arkia is fighting Cecilus, and Todd is like, "Oh, this good for not," like he's like annoyed at Arkia's taking so long. He's like, he doesn't even care, is what Subaru thought. Like, this person's doing all these gross and evil things. Like, I'd be disgusted, but this goes beyond the pale, right? The fact that he doesn't even respect the fact that she's doing this for him, right?
No, not at all. He feels frustrated at Jamal for being part of the reason why they have Arakia here.
He the way he views Arakia, there's that chilling moment, I think, where as we're talking about, right, like he just disparages Arakia as just a tool, a weapon, and oh man, Jamal, you're always a problem to me even when you're dead. That just sent chills down my spine, man. I was like, the closest thing you could even argue that Todd had as a friend, right? And he just views him as his greatest nuisance. It's scary. Like, it's inhuman, right? It's on that level of, like, you can't specifically diagnose, 'cause I don't think he exactly is, but he gives me very sociopathic vibes.
Oh, he's 100% a sociopath. Absolutely, that's what he is. Antisocial personality disorder to a T.
So that's definitely what he is. I'm not misreading that.
No, not at all. He has no regard for human life. The only person aside from himself that he cares about is his fiance.
Yeah, because it's his fiance. Right?
His possession. Yeah. And he's so good at masking his behaviors that I'm sure to maybe Katya, he seems like a normal enough person.
Oh, yeah.
Or even a sweet person.
Yeah, he might just know that he's supposed to be like proper and romantic to her and can act that way just because he knows how to do it.
Yeah,
because he's that calculating.
He's read it in books or something. I think the thing that scared me the most is there's a moment from Subaru's narration near the climax of this phase where Subaru starts to question if even the mask of violence that Todd wears is actually him too. And it had this moment of realization to me of like, I don't think Todd is even like in his nature a violent person, rather than it just being a means to an end and a mask. I think there's nothing in Todd. I think he's empty.
I think that violence is in him, to me personally.
I know what you mean, but like I mean in the sense of from how Subaru perceives it, of like the mask of violence he wears and like purposely puts on to kill those. That is like the thing that Todd does, and Todd is a violent person. But at the end of the day, what makes Todd a inhuman is that he doesn't even attribute violence to the same way a human being understands violence. It's like an animal, right?
True.
Yeah.
Animal nature.
I mean, he swaps masks as he sees fit, as we see in this arc. I mean, the way that he coldly manipulates situations, and like immediately can switch on a dime to be like, this person thinks that, like, as soon as, like, especially this is a great example. I mean, one of many examples in this arc because it's so beautifully written. It's like, as soon as Gustav dies and they break the thing and they escape, he immediately starts saying, "Hey, these two people just killed Gustav. We're here at the Divine General Archaea by decree. Now that she's the leader of you guys, she's like your authority. You have to find and kill them immediately." Like that, like quick on a dime of like being surprised to immediately being like, okay, I know now. Gustav's dead. She's now the leader. Okay, I can use this to leverage every guard in this place. And then saying like, okay, never like I still have to kill these people because they're marked. So yeah, Archaea, please use as little water as possible to kill them because you can. Like that, like him like knowing that or knowing to say that or think that is just so gross. Like it's just like one thing where he's like, you don't have to use that much water. Like
just use a cup of water.
He does everything in the most efficient way possible he knows will work. And if anything is outside of his control, that's when he starts getting frustrated or scared.
And then will run away because there's no other option for him.
Yeah,
because he doesn't have room for mistakes like Subaru does.
Yeah. But like that perception is so great, and I think it's one of the reasons why it's contrasted so well with Cecilus here, is because while Cecilus has this very romantic idea of fate and whatnot, I think Todd is so the opposite, in which everything is built on merit to a point where things aren't romantic, things aren't clean. I have to figure out the best way of getting out of the situation, and it doesn't matter how ugly it looks at the end, as long as it's the most potential. If there's even a slight chance of me failing here, because he knows how smart he is, he knows how capable he is at turning a situation at any, even at like a bit of disadvantage. You know, even when he's surprised, he still comes out ahead in most situations, as we see throughout this arc. He will immediately, as we see at the very end, just turn around and be like, no, we can't do this. This isn't something I want to even engage with.
Something's off here, so we're not doing it.
So we're not doing it, yeah. There's this is maybe like a strange way to compare Cecilus and Todd, but if I was to imagine them as like an animal, right? I feel Cecilus is like a peacock in a way, like the gallant,
fair enough,
like show off, like proud and pride. Todd to me is like the embodiment of what I feel a wolf is, like genuine, just actual fucking ruthlessness and survival and animal monstrosity and like scary threat. There's a really cool moment. I won't because we're going to be talking about this in the climax. I won't specifically refer what he's saying here, but who he's saying this to. But there's a moment where, and I imagine he says this in his most monotone voice. He's responding to a character that says, "I'm a warrior. Let's duel." Right? And Todd says, "I'm not a warrior. I'm a soldier," and just fucking kills him then and there, or at least thinks he kills him. And it's like, oh my god, if that does not like epitomize Todd, I don't know what does, you know?
Yeah, because he is a soldier of Wallachia, and that is the like definition of him as a character. But as a quick aside before we like move on or discuss anything else, this wasn't there when I was reading it the first time, but when I was perusing back to these final few chapters, and I saw like the colorized image from the light novel volumes here, I immediately recognized something, and I'm going to put it into our group chat here. I don't think that this will be something that we can put up on the video because it is the light novel images, but it is the scene of Todd with Natsuki Schwartz here, pressed against the wall in this phase, contrasted with Al and Natsumi back in phase 4.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't even I don't think I even did. I must not have looked at the image properly because I was speed reading through the chapter because I was just wanting to read more.
I don't think this was in the chapter. I was looking through the pictures for the volumes here from the light novels and noticed that this feels pretty familiar.
That is
of like
wow.
Right before kind of Subaru needs to make a major change in how he's deciding to act and move forward. And it's interesting to me that Todd, through his villainous actions, pushes Subaru in a more positive direction.
Yeah.
And Al, in his attempts to help, pushes Subaru further from the healthy choice. But in both cases, they have his alternate identities pressed up and their backs against the wall.
Yeah.
It's really cool symmetry, especially on Otsuka's part of the illustrations. That's so cool.
Right, and it makes me wonder of like further similarities between them, and that they're both kind of reflections on like what Subaru is as like a combatant almost, where we see like Todd making like the most optimal and correct decisions to handle the situation, but Al does the same thing in a fight where he makes the exact right moves he needs to do to win the battle. And like kind of both of them are reflected against Subaru, who has to make the right decisions regarding other people in order to succeed. I just thought it was an interesting comparison there.
I think you're right. I think they occupy a very similar space in which I think they're both meant to ask a question to Subaru and see what the answer would be if they want to be like, if they have to be like these people, that are pushing them and are cornering them. Because really what this is cornering the things that Subaru has to learn and rise above. Like, think about both these like ideas of both sides of these alternate personalities in which Subaru is trying to hide away from, right? In a way, I mean, not the infantilization, that's not really his choice, but like in reality, it is allowing him to hide away the things that he has to confront.
At this point, he was intentionally hiding from the reality because he was doing everything he could to not reset in fear of forcing people's deaths to be locked in.
Yeah, their fates to be locked in, right?
So when confronted with, this sort of way of seeing, like, is trying to make Subaru be pressured enough to be honest, to have a revelation. I think Todd is going to, even if this is probably one of the best, and I can't really like see, maybe there'll be a better Todd moment later on in the future. I think like there's going to be a head-to-head in which Subaru has to recognize something about himself that Todd is going to push him to the edge of, that he's going to carry with him for the rest of the series. It's going to have to be the same with Al, I think, eventually.
My personal feeling on what this thing may be is Subaru killing Todd. And I know that seems strange because he's killed people previously, like he's killed Betelgeuse, right?
I think it's just Betelgeuse, though.
But it's just Betelgeuse. And also the way he views Betelgeuse and Todd is different. Because whilst we get these moments of Subaru thinking Todd as a monster, he still also thinks Todd as a human being, right? Because there's moments in previous phases where there's opportunities where they could have genuinely hurted him, and Subaru refuses to do that because he doesn't want to kill him.
Yeah.
And
Subaru kind of has plausible deniability with Betelgeuse because he was a spirit in the end.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think Todd is going to be the first human being Natsuki Subaru genuinely and fully kills. And I think that is going to stay with him for the rest of the series. I don't think Todd is going to live past Arc 8. And I think but Todd is going to live in the story as always the first true person Natsuki Subaru killed.
One of the things that you have to consider with Todd, especially as an antagonist to Subaru, is he's not a threat when Subaru has people of significant power with him. Because every time Todd has been a danger, he's been with Flop or a weakened Rem.
Yeah. Whenever he's at his weakest.
Here alone, but if, say, even Louis or Torita were with him, or when Holly and Kuna showed up outside the city, Todd is not a threat at that point anymore. So with the inclusion of the rest of the Amelia camp finally showing up and looking for Subaru, Todd can't really be that much of a threat when you have, like, Betty there, who could freeze him instantly with a single point of contact hit.
Yeah.
Or Amelia, who could destroy him just by him being injured or having a single scratch, which he does get in these fights.
Oh, yeah. And I don't
Yeah,
mean in the sense of that his threat will be that magnanimous when he has these powerful people around him. I just think Todd will always try and find a possibility he will always be a threat to Subaru.
He's cunning.
Yeah. In that way of even though those strong people may be around him, Todd is going to try to flee most of the time, right? In Todd's, like, the way the math in Todd's head works, I think he sometimes feels like he's on the edge of taking a risk, of trying to take a risk to kill Subaru, because he thinks Subaru is that much of a threat to his existence that if he doesn't kill him, he will be always threatened. It's like
what he said.
He can't be settled when Subaru's alive.
Todd is doing all this because he believes that the idea of a rebellion means that he won't know peace.
Yes.
The idea, and if Subaru is the poster for that rebellion, killing Subaru means peace. You know, he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to be threatened. He wants to live his miserable, I mean, not miserable, his lovely sociopathic existence, right? And the thing is, right, with him is that I agree with you that he's going to have to kill Todd because all the themes of the story is pointing it out. The way that I've talked about, you know, even in the early part of the phase where it's like Subaru has to make a choice about who he decides is worthy or not to live in the world that he's going to create. When he's going to be affecting more people, he has to start making decisions, right? He can't have the perfect decisions, perfect outcomes. He has to start choosing.
He has to make compromises.
His return by death, as we start seeing, is becoming more fallible. As it becomes more fallible, the people that he can save is more valuable in the loops that he's in, right?
Yeah.
And the as you said, like the people that are deserving of, you know, being saved, you know, using his power. If Todd goes through a scenario, right, he wouldn't like. Do you think Subaru would risk now at this point, Todd, to like if everything went fine but Todd died? Do you think he'd be like, oh, I have to go back, or is that something he has to get
I
over?
don't think so.
Exactly.
Like at least adult Subaru has already made that decision that he's not going back for the enemy soldiers because he had to make that decision when the Shudrakians took them all out.
Yeah. So I think at this point he is going to have to say, my life is more valuable than Todd's at some point, and he's going to have to say that, yeah, I will kill him.
And that is the moment where we're going to see a drastic change in Subaru. But I don't think that's going to be a thing he immediately comes to terms with. I think he's going to have a guilt surrounding his character in the next couple arcs of the story.
Doubtlessly.
Like, even though Todd is dead as a character, Todd is always alive in Subaru because Todd is the first person he actively decided I must kill to preserve the world and ideology and people I love.
Yeah, it's the most selfish thing you can do. So Subaru will think about it all the time as somebody who has such heroic ideal, unless he gets grounded by people around him, which he will.
Yeah.
But I think there'll be a moment where he'll be like, hey, like, I did this, you know, like, there's no more selfish expression of a human life than taking somebody else's. Because you're making the value judgment of, especially in like combat like this, right? You're like, no, I will triumph over you. And Subaru has the opportunity to try again and again until it becomes that outcome of being like, yes, you die, I live.
Well,
I think it'll come to that point.
We'll have to see what Todd's ultimate fate is if he has to have one, or if, like every other human enemy he has faced for the most part, aside from the witch cult, he eventually ends up allying him somehow.
There is no way.
Well,
way.
As we've said, in Vlachia, I think the decision is the enemies are no longer incomprehensible monsters. They are incomprehensible monsters, humans,
Yes.
you know, comma humans. Yeah.
It's a in that degree of, I think Subaru is going to have to recognize at a certain point that there is, it's not black and white, good and evil, right? But there is genuine evil. Like, there's genuine evil out there in the world. In this world, in his previous world, there are people that may not necessarily be true evil, but there are people that do evil things. And if he is going to live up to his ideal of not being the hero, but being a hero, I think that is something he's going to have to come to terms with.
True.
Because he doesn't necessarily have to be the hero. He can still be the sage and a hero, right?
Well, this whole arc originally starts with him trying to just be Rem's hero.
Yes.
Which is still something that he could get back to being pretty easily here.
Yeah, but I
mean, honestly, if she saw his success here on the Gladiator Island, she might start to have a change of heart to the last time she spoke with him.
My thing I posit is I don't think it's necessarily being a hero that's the problem for Subaru. I think it's the way he defined being Rem's hero. And I still think he can be Rem's hero in a way. I just don't think he can only be Rem's hero anymore as the story goes forward because of how the toxicity of how he's defined himself within that is so attached to that idea. Do you know what I mean? Like, he could still be the hero of Rem.
Oh, yeah,
But
100%.
he can't just be Rem's hero anymore if he's going to be a hero. Again, not the hero, capital.
Well, I guess speaking of Subaru's waifus here, this is a good time to move on to my favorite moment in Arc 7 so far, which
Yes.
is the climax to this phase, and the return of Satella.
Yeah.
Before we get into that climax, can we talk a bit about some of the name chapters of our good boys?
Yeah,
This
100%.
Yeah, I forgot. Like, this part here, this entire stretch, is really compelling in a lot of ways. I mean, we get all the backstory. We touched upon them briefly. You don't have to repeat them, but the way in which they get cornered, up to the point in which Subaru confronts them with Tanza and stuff like that, and is like, "Hey, I have the tool, right? I'm gonna do this, right?" And even though he doesn't know how to do it, which is funny,
Yeah.
it's like the moment where they're all about to jump Todd, and every moment in this part is just so brilliant. In which
Yeah.
the way that Todd dismantles every situation that they have planned to like ambush him just feels so smart and like strong and like
stressful.
and stressful and like ruthless, right? And at a point, I actually was like, I wonder if a few of them will just die. Like, a few of these boys that are part of his squad are just gonna die.
Before he gets to the end, and we do get to the point where the restart point catches up to White's dying. I was devastated. He had been my favorite character this entire phase.
I was hot.
I still love him so much. He's like Jamal. He's just kind of an instant adoration for him. I just get excited when he's there, when he's on screen or on page. And so when it was the point of it caught up to him dying, I like thought back and was realizing, that these characters are here to force Subaru and accept and see this happen for the first time, where he can't save them and have to confront that.
Not saving someone, right? Because he's never, he's not. Like, it's for Rem, it's not an irreversible consequence, at least in his mind, right? That's how he gets through it. There is irreversible damage in these people dying permanently.
Yeah.
Right, and even though it does get undone,
but it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like it's teaching Subaru that even if he has this, he can't afford to make stupid, like, willy-nilly mistakes, because that can still happen. Right?
Yeah, return by death isn't a instant solution to saving people's lives, like he was using it earlier in this phase.
He has to learn again that return by death is a curse. It's not a...
Well, that's the whole ultimate point of this climax, though, is I think that's going to be a point where we disagree here at the end.
Okay.
Right. Well, we'll get to that in a second. I also think that one thing about it is, you guys are totally right. I think this perception of, I was like, hey, this is where Super starts learning that there are points in which his power is fallible.
Yeah.
That it'll come to a point in time, and we're setting this up for the future, that there's going to be a moment in which a character dies and the Super tries to reset, and it's not able to, it's not able to save them. And
yeah, this arc has been building up to that, like with the beginning with the soldiers, then again with the not quite bloodless siege.
But like a character we know, right? Like,
yeah,
that seems, like a thing that Teppei. I was like, oh, Teppei's going to start seeding that in here,
And he does such a good job, I think, of endearing us to these characters in such a quick amount of time, right? Especially with how little screen time we get to their narration and in their own name chapters, mind you, of their thoughts and feelings and how they feel about Subaru and how, and the reason I connected to Waits, I think, so quickly too, is that he always had consideration for Subaru in the way of, like, he's the adult here, right? Whilst the other guys here are technically adults too, they have their own flaws, are making it so that they roundabout way try to protect Subaru. Waits decides to be the adult and protect this child. He swears because around the rumors, because I guess we haven't talked about this directly fully, the rumors of Subaru being the illegitimate son of the Emperor, Vincent Valachian. He's the one behind the rebellion. Waits doesn't give a shit about that, because the boys do in some way. Like, they're not fully selfless. Waits doesn't care. He tells Subaru straight up, before all of these disasters even happen, mind you, at the start of this, which I think is a thing to pay intended, right? Of, I do not care who you are. I do not care for your secrets. I will always lend you my strength. And it's further reinforced in his own name chapter when the last things he thinks about is, no one ever believed in me before you did. And
heartbreaking.
That genuinely made me cry when I read that, because it made me realize, because there are moments before where you think about how Subaru has changed the people around him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you read that line, you really think, and it really makes the moment that when Tanza talks to Subaru later in this climax, which we'll talk more in detail about, that moment hits harder because you see the results of Subaru changes the people around him in such a positive and beautiful way. He is such a genuinely wonderful person that gives things to people and treats people like people in a world where people do not do that to each other. Specifically also in Wallachia, mind you. And
True.
These men have been disaffected. They feel like outcasts. They feel like no one loves them. They feel like the world has betrayed them. But the world may have betrayed them, but Subaru has not betrayed them. Subaru does not want to betray them, and that is why they will not betray Subaru, and that is why they throw their lives away for Subaru. It's because they have that love in a political sense of, as I mentioned in previous podcasts, of Subaru becoming Little King. He's not necessarily going to be a king in title, right? But he has that, and now at the end of this climax we'll see, he has a political force. He is a political figure. He is changing the lives of people in this world. And he is gaining that loyalty from people in the same way a just and good king does, and draws the good people around him. It very much feels to me like a moment of, it is pure loving loyalty in its most unadulterated form, and it's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
It's also,
heartwarming.
to a degree, it's a reflection of Vincent as a ruler too.
Yes.
Where we haven't seen him be a strong person, but he's very effective at leading the people around him and getting them to be, getting the best out of them.
Like how perceptive he is and how well that people see him and his vows, and that loyalty, is part of the lacking spirit. But it's also how amazing does it seem to be that Vince is able to plan. It gives an element of foresight to this, where if somebody comes here and tries to overwrite my plan,
yes,
don't disregard that, because this is the only plan that you have to listen to, which is so crazy. Somebody says that it's from me, it's don't
trust
even
me
believe
now versus trust me later.
Yeah. Which is such a cool setup, by the way. When I initially saw that, I was like, "Oh, so this is how it might go."
Yeah.
And
Vincent out here playing chess while everyone else is just at 40 checkers.
Yeah.
Playing checkers.
And it's great too, because Gustav as a character, we haven't talked too much about him.
There's not too much to him.
Yeah, he's a loyal boy, a loyal general.
He's a loyal subject, right?
He's not a bad guy. That's what we're not talking about him, because he's not a bad guy, but he's tacitly disinteresting, as Cecilus and Subaru find out.
Yeah,
that he doesn't entertain Cecilus because he thinks he's fun to hang around. He's not that. He has just a serious personality.
But it's so interesting that, of all the people to trust, he trusts this specific person. I think that adds weight to his decision, right? With what he does.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I love that we get to see all of these multifaceted moments of all these different characters. With Tanza, in particular, Tanza was a huge surprise for me this phase, especially in the climax. And she embodies Yorna's values so well, and I think continues Yorna's spirit in the story, even if we're not directly talking to her right now,
Mm-hmm.
I feel that.
She
I
has
think
earned her place amongst Subaru's squad of little girls.
Yes.
I was about to say that. I was like, it's amazing how Teppei can write all these little girls and make them somewhat distinctive.
Yeah, they're not all the
You know?
same entity, you know?
Yeah, the distinct little girls all the way down. I do think it's very funny though, and I mentioned this earlier. It's the fact that like there is going to be a squad of at least 3 little girls that have unique powers that is going to be following Subaru around.
Well, he's got 3 this arc.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
He's got to catch them all.
and it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of. I was about to say this, and this is what I actually was leading to. The fact that if at the end of this arc, I'm now realizing how monumental the conclusion to this Vlakian saga will be if Subaru pulls off what he's trying to pull off with Vincent, which is he comes back to Lagunica and everyone's like, "You are one of the most important persons in the world. You just dictated the entire empire of our rival country. You're now friends with them. You're now allies with them. You did that under your banner." Like
You have a close personal friendship with at least 2 divine generals.
Yes.
Yeah, and you literally they literally say, "Oh, we wouldn't have been able to do this if it wasn't for the efforts of Natsuki Subaru." Like that'll end up happening, and it's like that is beyond the pale of anything that they've done before. Because even the things that Subaru's done before, there's always and this camp and these people, so it was easy to discredit his contribution. But now it's like if the Emperor himself is like, "Hey, he played his part perfectly and he helped me get my throne back," like it's kind of his name is going to be spoken far and wide. Like Subaru has this misconception that like, oh, they knew who I am because I have a name for myself in Lagunica, right? But like no, you're not that well known yet. But like I think after Arc 8 he'll be that well known that people will hear the words Nasty Subaru and be like, "Oh yeah, I know who you are exactly."
And that's really funny too, because we initially at the beginning of this arc we think about Vincent's thoughts about the hero Natsuki Subaru he's heard so much about, right? And how he thinks this guy is nothing like what I've heard about that guy. Like this guy isn't that. And
Can't be the same guy.
can't be the same guy. And it's even greater too because we've already set up in the story that Abel will always reward those that serve him, even if they do it in a roundabout way, even if they're not necessarily like best of friends with him or loyal with him. He is about rewarding those who serve him. And I think the way, as Gold's mentioning here, he's going to reward Subaru and the Emilia camp is by mentioning that they were the ones to help succeed that, because that's going to boost their selection campaign, I think. Like,
depending on if Vincent or if Abel gets the throne back from Vincent or not.
That's true. That is true.
I think it'll happen.
I think it will happen. It could not happen. That would be fucking strange and wild and chaotic.
I mean,
There is a great disaster that's supposed to be coming, though.
I wonder if we're going to see some, like... do you know, like, how there's multiple periods in Chinese history where they break up into, like, warlord states?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see something like that in Wallachia, and Subaru's new army is going to have to carve its own path.
The thing is, it's too much. It's like, if Wallachia is not reunited by the end of Arc 8 or whatever, I'm like... because it's going to be like, well, there are rogue factions and rogue divine generals who are going to start interlacing with the main story from here on out, which could be part of what Teppei might want to happen. It might be like, I like these characters too much, they might still be relevant, but Wallachia is like chaos, which would be kind of crazy.
I could see Yorna like allying with Emilia to create like a neutral state between Wallachia and
Like a
Lagunica
war
for
state.
people to go to.
Yeah. And a demi-human state, too.
Mhm.
It would also be an aspect of, right, that from a story perspective, especially in terms of storytelling when it comes to the royal selection, if there's instability in your greatest rival and biggest neighbor, that's going to cross over into the border of Lagunica no matter what, right?
Yeah.
In some formal way. And that would affect the royal selection. Because, let's be real, Lagunica's still heading for pretty bad places at the moment. Until that selection is headed out and we don't get more problems, Lagunica's going to be suffering a lot of problems for still a pretty lengthy period of time. And
That's true.
If the neighboring country and the biggest country in the world is in a state of civil war, that is going to affect Lagunica.
Well, here's my thought. if that does happen and Arc 8 doesn't end positively like that and it starts becoming this chaotic place, I think the only logical conclusion I'd have with that is that one by one, every single country starts falling until it's only Lagunica, and then the
And
climax of the story happens there.
yeah.
Yeah. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know if I think that's how it could happen, but that's a way I could see it happening, right?
For sure.
One thing I will mention though is Todd is. We've already mentioned Todd is terrifying. He kills everyone I love, and I hate him so much. There is these.
He cuts off a guard's head.
Yes.
And
Oh my god.
Kicks it into someone else.
And then calls on the corpse of their mob beast to come in to crash into everybody because he knows that they will eat the corpses because they aren't truly controlled, not like Melee's control over mob beasts, so that they will eat the corpse of somebody because they're vindictive of them because Todd knows this because he is insane like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, he is like one of my favorite moments of Todd is that like when Idra comes in and tries to like go at him and he cuts off his arm at the elbow and stuff like that, and Idra's still like hugging onto him to try to let them get away. Even at that moment where he throws the axe down, Todd recognizes in a split second that they're trying to get distract them from this, and he throws a knife and stabs the lizard guy. And it's like that quick-wittedness, even after you're like randomly like assaulted, when you thought that guy was dead, you chop off his arm and immediately throw a knife knowing that somebody is going to try to steal away Subaru. Like it's crazy, like that level of perceptiveness.
He's a terrifying opponent, the scariest and most interesting antagonist of the series yet, I dare say. And all of these moments where our boys die for Subaru, I think really reinforce a lot of the story's themes. We get a lot of moments of Subaru having to realize that people care for him and love him deeply and truly. And, he's heard this so many times before, but I think it reinforces extra here because these are people he's grown with very quickly in a very short period of time.
Yeah, somebody very much loves him, and we'll get to that in a second.
Oh, yeah. And we'll talk about real love soon, yeah. But I guess we'll talk about the big moment of this climax, which is fucking crazy.
Juicy.
So
Yes.
Todd yeets Tanza out a hole in the facility that they're in the island. And she ends up landing in the water and barely surviving, has a horn missing, is absolutely destroyed, and comes across a grief-ridden Subaru who has met Ceci and is just despaired. Like he's run away, he's terrified, Todd is pursuing him, and he feels like there's nothing he can do.
Yeah, and Ceci has to fend off Archaea because he's been fighting her, and that's where she's been the entire time.
Which I think he did come out on top of, even though he got burnt half of his body to a black crisp. He still won that fight.
Yeah, but the thing to note about that is also the fact that, in this moment, one of the reasons why I thought this could be like a permanent thing is definitely because of how precarious a position Todd was being set up to be in. Because this entire time he's like, "Where's Archaea? Like, where is she? She should be here back by now. I can't believe she's not here." And every little annoyance that Todd is experiencing seemed like more and more sacrifice to finally get in the right position for this scene. And when this scene happened, I was like, "Oh, it's done."
Yeah.
I was like, the implications of this scene, but somebody else wants to lead into it properly. Yeah.
I want to talk a bit about the conversation between Tanza and Subaru here because it's so important and it's very impactful. Because I want to hyper focus on this because this is just crazy, right? We have this moment of Subaru starting to get to a point where he kind of did in his adult life, where he starts to doubt himself and have lots of self-hatred because of him feeling like he can't meet the expectations of being his father's son because he can't save everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he then begins to think, any capable person wouldn't need return by death, really, if you think about it, right?
Todd doesn't.
And then he thinks, Todd doesn't. Todd doesn't need an authority to do what he does. He comes across Tanza, she's battered, and Subaru has at this point given up. And Subaru admits to Tanza that he lied about going along with being the Emperor's son. which is what Tanza speculated and everyone else speculated. And
Yeah, he's been using that to control people for a chunk of his phase.
And this is a moment I was not expecting at all, but makes complete sense in retrospective for me, right? Tanza says she does not give a single fuck, basically. She's like, I do not care. I do not care. Because I don't think you understand, Schwartz-Summer, that those people that died for you feel about you the same way I feel about Yona. And that expanded my brain for a second there. I was like, I didn't even think of that as a parallel, right? Until Tanza makes this point. But it truly is something like that, right? Of this
I mean, that
very
power,
special and unique love.
As we talked about before, the power that we see from both Yorna and Priscilla is a power foreign to that of the might of Valakia, and it's the real way to fight the power, you know.
Yeah,
in that
it's
way.
defiant to the very themes and concept that Valakia stands on, and has successfully fended it off over and over again.
And I just want to read a tiny little section here. I wanted to save everyone. Tanza replies to Subaru, "You have saved them, to the extent that they would stake their lives in order to protect you, Schwartz-Summer." Subaru responds, "No, you're wrong. It's not like that." Subaru wished for those who had kindly taken his side, for those who had treated him well, for everyone to have their hearts and bodies alike be saved by his own self. Were he unable to do so then, he would be no son of Natsuki Kenichi. And I think that epitomizes just how hard this phase hits, because it does such a good job at setting up this central conflict for this climax, right? Of all of the things that have been built up in this arc, and all of the things that have built up in this phase for this one moment, hits so hard, because Subaru is... he's learned his lessons from Arc 4, but he hasn't fully grasped the implications of what that means for everyone that he affects around him, right? He can't understand, as Tanza says rightly, that he has already saved these people. He has already saved them. He's saved their hearts. He's saved their souls. He's helped them in a way that they would die for him, and they would die having no regrets, right? Or at least not regretting saving him.
Yeah.
And Tanza teaching that lesson to Subaru just feels so important, and I think is going to be a really keystone moment for the future of the series. Very similar to your No Hero, Natsuki Subaru, right? But yeah. And then Todd shows the fuck back up.
Yep. Can't get rid of him that easy.
But he doesn't have his headband. He's wounded, okay?
It's the one thing Idra managed to do was get his headband.
Idra took his fucking headband, and he did it.
He looks, this is actually an interesting note in the authorial thing, where it's like, he now looks finally like the wild beast that he is. His hair's all long and torn down and stuff like that, and tousled and frazzled. And I was like, yeah, there's a part of Todd that is his imperceptible, good, pretty boy good looks, that makes him, if you saw this character, you would not realize he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
If you just saw any of his art, and I think that's one of the genius of him. But, right now, you see him for the bestial, monster that he is. And
Tanza is preparing to fight Subaru in a way that I think pretty much suggests Tanza's ready to die for Subaru too, right?
She accept that she's going to die.
Yeah, and she's there to fight. Subaru then breaks his taboo, except he doesn't, because there are no consequences to it. He tells Todd, "I can return by death," and the taboo doesn't come into effect, and Todd just says, "What?"
Crazy.
And what's even better? And
This
speaks even better to his character. This is a thing I've been wanting to mention about Todd as we've gone through. Todd does not care about this whatsoever, really. He has such a lack of empathy. I don't think he may logically grasp what that means, but I don't think he understands truly what that means, right? Because the reactions Tanza and him have are so opposite, it's actually fucking hilarious. Oh, go on.
Because Todd's only thinking about eliminating the threat in front of him. As we saw before, there was a moment in which Subaru in one of the earlier loops said, like, Todd's like, if you are that person's, seeing Subaru's older self, if you are his like younger brother, then I'll keep you alive because I'll give you some leverage to use against him. And the moment that Subaru lies, he's like, you lied. Like, he's like, oh, I get it. You need to lie better, right? And like that means that right now Todd knows exactly that he's telling some sort of truth, but like that truth can't dissuade him as long as he feels like he doesn't know the implications behind it, so he's like, yeah, I still have to fight you.
And yeah, he Subaru pushes Tanza out the way with invisible providence and then uppercuts Todd.
Great moment.
Which is a great moment. Starts to crush his skull, or at least attempts to, with it, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Which it reinforces to me that Subaru must kill Todd. And Todd, as Todd always does, like the fucking like snake that you can never kill, runs away into the smog and smoke of the fire and doesn't reveal himself for the rest of this loop.
We can't get the satisfaction.
You can't get the satisfaction of seeing the slimy asshole die.
It can't be a situation where the loop is worth keeping.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We get a really sweet moment with Tanza where she still doesn't fully understand what Subaru's saying, but she guesses a little bit. And she
gets the heart of it, and I think it said like she doesn't understand it, but she's still reaching the heart of what he's trying to say.
Yeah. And she grabs to his hand and holds his hand, and he tells her, next time I'm gonna save everyone, or next time I'm gonna fix this, right? And she agrees. And that's like his confirmation of like, yes, I can do this. I need to.
The very first time anybody's able to, besides of course Echidna, but that's a special circumstance.
Yeah.
Commiserate. Yeah, and Roswell obviously, but commiserate in this like moment in a sweet manner, right? Like it is. She doesn't quite understand it, but the fact that Subaru is able to communicate to somebody and they're able to perceive that he's saying something about it, like about his authority, and like be able to be like, yeah, you got this. Like, I feel like that's such an important moment.
Yeah. And it speaks to it even... what speaks to me more about this moment, we'll get more about the big thing with this, but Subaru does something which I don't think he did in Arc 4, which shows his change, in that he still gives Subaru he gives Tanza, the curse tool, tells her about Ceci, and basically directs her on how to save herself in this loop, even though he's going to die.
Yeah, because he doesn't know, nor does the Witch of Greed know exactly what happens after the loops are done. So this is him covering all of his bases. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, if you live on beyond this, I want... Because that loop isn't necessarily the worst possible loop. Sure, Subaru is dead, but...
Pretty bad.
It's pretty bad, but it's like, hey, maybe Cecilus is still alive, maybe everybody else is still alive, maybe they can still salvage somewhat the Empire's thing, who knows. But it's, we'll see. But yeah, that's one of those things where it's like, at least the people that he's trying to save somewhat God saves.
And it's also the intent of, regardless of whether or not, right, what's going to happen happens. He, I think in his heart of hearts, maybe knows that this may happen, but he still does that anyway, which is speaking to his philosophy of life matters regardless of whether or not I loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that he's still going to help her, even if this world gets erased. And yeah, we get to the important moment of Subaru screaming his taboo into the sky.
Yeah, it's like maybe the observers just didn't fucking hear me. I'm going to shout it out louder.
That was a good moment.
I was like, wow, Subaru is, he's challenged Fate Sama before, but this is him literally shouting in Fate Sama's face.
But honestly, this moment, I when he said that, I was like, well, if the world resets, then maybe it's fine, but like, maybe he is accidentally revealing something here that Satella is protecting him from.
Oh, like he's now vulnerable in a way.
Yeah, he now has some eyes on him. Like, oh, you just said what?
Oh, the observer's eyes twitch and like they turn to him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But maybe the reset makes it not matter, but still.
But yeah, and then Satella appears and takes Subaru into the Shadow Garden and spams the I loves yous at Subaru. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what you guys were feeling as you were reading this before you got to this moment. I thought this was a permanent thing. I thought everything was fucked. There was a point where I genuinely felt that I didn't think that a lot of this was going to be revertible. And that's what makes this moment so great, I think, is it doesn't feel like it's taking away from these moments in the climax. But
so as a point, that's after the main point that I want to talk about here of Subaru calling to Satella and basically like asking her for help, which he has never done before. Yeah. He's used the taboo, but he has not like actively done that with the intention of getting her attention.
Well, one of the things that's perceived to me here is that it's reinforcing something that Subaru felt even back all the way in Arc 4, which is he's now realizing more and more that there's not a malevolent presence within Satella. Not necessarily. Like, the way that things are malfunctioning with his authority, he's probably thinking more and more like, was she protecting me by putting these save points in the right place?
Yeah.
She describes the authority without Satella as this authority done without love. And like that's the big point here, is that all of his loops so far have been mechanical, necessary. They're just happening as they happen. But ever since he's been on this island and with the 11 seconds of hell, he hasn't had her there to support him at all. Like she's been absent. And having her finally show up as this process of one that Subaru wants to ask for help with, because he's asked for assistance and made use of everyone else around him this whole phase. But that's been what it right. She's the conclusion of that. She is the apex of I need to ask for help. I'm going to ask Satella, who so far he has either been directly opposed to or begrudgingly dealing with as a side to the powers that he has. But here, finally, he's accepting her and accepting that she cares about him enough to help him out, which ties back to what Tanza was saying of all these people are willing to die for you.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things in which we remember what was said to him by the other witches back all the way in Arc 4, which is it's unfair to her, right?
Yeah.
Subaru hasn't up to this point really vocalized the fact that he's realized that he's actually relying on, Satella to do this great thing for him. And at this part, he understands it more acutely than ever, that there's actually somebody here looking out for him. The reason why his authority works out so well for him is because somebody who loves him is guiding it. And as she's saying, I love you, he's like, yeah, it may not be everything, but I know. Like, this is the first time he's
fucking
really
Han Solo. Yeah. I can't believe he Han Solo'd her.
Yeah.
But he's in that way of, like, he accepts it, but he doesn't reciprocate it. Like,
right.
And
yeah, because before he was, like, rejecting her love for him.
Yeah.
Yes. And he said
it was, like, what do you even know? You don't know me. I don't know you. What could you possibly love about me? But here it's... I know you love me, and I'm willing to accept that and take that as his help.
Yeah, it's valid. It's no longer imperceivable to him. He's now saying, okay, that makes sense. I know.
And it's one of those things, right, where he's had to come to this realization, but he had to have Return by Death without Satella to realize that Return by Death is a effort of love, right?
Yeah, and it's not like a trick or anything.
Yeah. Because
there's no hidden meaning behind
situations, Satella hasn't almost hard-locked him out of existence, No,
the only time he's ever been mad at the save point was with the situation with Rem, but he needed a save point that was already too late to help her to avoid having to fight the whale a second time.
Yeah, exactly.
So and then the next one after that is avoiding having to fight Betelgeuse again. Like, it was already a point that he couldn't go back to a save point early enough to save Rem after beating the whale, because it's already too late at that point.
Because it's also the point of Subaru's using Return by Death differently to how Satella is using Return by Death for him. Satella is using Return by Death to save Subaru and make it so he's not in a point where he will always die. Subaru is using it to save the people around him as well as himself.
Yeah. And one thing that this phase kind of made me. I'm 100% certain now, and it's interesting. When he crushed her heart, it's a mistake. It's like by accident. Like she doesn't realize what she's doing. She's just doing it because she's excited, not because she's trying to hurt him.
Yeah.
Because this phase kind of clarified that, and now I understand that there's not some malicious intent behind it.
No, I'm not even positive if the taboo is actually tied to Satella anymore.
It's the Witch of Envy, right?
Yeah.
Well, even then, we've had so much talk of the observers, and it's even Subaru bringing them up right before he calls out to Satella here to make the taboo. It might be them or some other force in this universe that is not allowing him to share what Satella is doing
Because
for
that
him.
that would be way beyond the scope of what his authority should allow, almost.
Yes, because if he can tell other people that he's able to loop, it's going to affect a lot more than just his ability to change things.
Maybe the observers can only tell people by their ode. So if your ode is manipulated, they no longer receive you as the same person.
Maybe. That's one of the reasons why I think Satella may have lost track of him.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
I have another point that I want to address later when we can kind of go into some theory crafting stuff, but I also want to highlight why, to me, this moment with Satella is the culmination of everything this arc has done so far. So we start with Arc 7 of Subaru is doing everything he can to protect Rem, Provincial Rem, because he is entirely devoted to her. He is in love with her, but she has no idea who he is and why this terrifying person is doing things to help him out.
Yeah.
So he's in Satella's shoes with Rem at the beginning here. Then when we get to after everything related with him and Rem, we enter into the Chaos Flame where he's confronted with Yorna and gets to see just how powerful it can be to have someone extremely powerful share their love and have it be reciprocated and accepted into them.
You're so right.
Making that just so much more of a benefit. And then this whole phase has been showing Subaru's power without that love, without having that support and Satella with him.
Yeah, this realization is dawning, yeah.
So when he finally gets her, not only has he now been in her shoes, but can see the benefit and that she might actually mean it, but also can experience what it was with that exemplified and with that completely lost. And it is finally a point where he can accept it. That Satella, at this point, we could call her an ally. Yeah, like a true, genuine ally for Subaru.
Like, there is no question about it anymore, right? Like, at all, I think.
No, and that just begs the question of how much of Satella's history is actually true.
Yes.
Right.
What has she really done? I mean, exactly. Echidna claims she killed all the other witches, but we know that that's not true because Hector took out Echidna.
Yeah. And
I mean, we've talked about this
by Priscilla.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about this before, and it is what is the yoke of, like, what is it that they were fighting against? The witches. What is the authorities? I think that there is some sort of viciousness that people had a perception of the witches at a point in time because of the observers.
Yes.
The observers want to paint history a certain way, or through the stargazers, say this is a certain way.
Because authorities and witch factors, they go against the nature of this world. They are not at least of what the observers want with this world, right?
Or Ode Laguna.
Or Ode Laguna, yeah. They are considered a foreign entity. They are considered wrong and
it's interference
and a sin, right? So from that perspective, and if we're getting this idea of these observers and the way Ode Laguna works and how they may be connected, it makes you think, right? The observers had a hand in what happened 400 years ago in some way.
They must have.
There is no way they didn't have.
As soon as blessings started to exist in the world, which happened around 400 years ago, is the same thing that created the balance to strike back against the witches.
Yes.
So if that was by their will, and they, as I think Priscilla says, they control who gets blessings, then at that point, the lines are drawn in the sand very clearly. It also makes you question every single person with authority that we know throughout the series and their allegiance. I mean, of course, the Synarch bishops are more fanatical and tied to something. We've talked about how they're probably being manipulated by, Pandora and being put in separate bodies, whatever. But Pandora herself, it makes you wonder where her sides lie. Maybe by her rewriting of reality, wink, wink, like the observers would not want, her powers are meant to combat them. And it gives you a bit more recontextualization about like what were they fighting against, like what was Pandora doing, what is the seal, obviously we'll get to that later, but I mean the idea of like what is it that Hector and Echidna were feuding over, like it really gives you a big perception of these people were unjustly vilified for the most part, but what is it that was the origin of their rebellion?
And it also makes a point of, right, like I'm gonna get a bit crackpotty with this, so don't mind me, but does it not make more sense why Echidna created these magical devices called meteors? Then
yes, 100%.
In that sense of these observers from the stars, this is her weapon against them, right?
Well, her authority is also might just be like taking their advantage away from them. If her book of wisdom is what they knew or had designated was going to happen, then she could plan around either making sure that the things she wanted to happen will happen, or figuring out how to avoid the events that she doesn't want to go.
And I have a little bit of information that happens in a side story that was published before this arc, so I don't know if I should say it, but it gives you more context about how I think that you're on the right track with meteors and stuff like that with Echidna.
Is it the one with Beatrice and Puck?
Yes, that one.
Okay, yeah, I think that's one of the ones that I want to cover after this phase, after this arc. So we'll hold on to that for now.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
All I will say is it speaks to me more still when I think it's described that she basically attacks Hector with like a star with magic, right? Like almost cooling down a. And also the meteor that Felt uses in Arc 5 is like a staff that cools down star attacks, right?
Yeah, they do something with it, and I mean maybe like fucking Hoshi named it because he's a fucking Earth Weeb or whatever. It went with that, but there's so much there. But ultimately, what I wanted to just make sure we took away from this phase is the recontextualization of Subaru and Satella's relationship now being one that he is glad to have and is wanting to have. And just how awful Return by Death really is without her.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And as you were talking about last time, love cannot be a negative, like love can only be transferred. It's non-replenishing. So when she's been saying all this time that she loves Subaru, that has never been a negative thing. Sure, her obsession is negative, but the sentiment behind loving Subaru has always been something that was true and positive.
Mm.
It's also a case of, right, like I'm curious, right, like it makes me question it because like we always have these questions of like why does Satella love Subaru, right? But this makes me question it even more, right, with this unconditional love she has for him. Like where does that come from? Where is the source of that? Because it's deep, and it makes me think about Al too, and how his authority works, and how his authority is an authority without love, in a way, right?
Yes, that's what I was going to get to next. We get to see a sample of having to deal with this repetition over and over and over again, and how Subaru tries his hardest to make sure that the people he's saving are remembered as people, that he doesn't start seeing them as side characters that like Ceci does. Or not non-characters, like how Al sees them. He calls them Fox Girl.
Yeah. He doesn't
even see them as people.
Yeah.
And of just how warped and twisted that perception of having to redo and restart makes you. And honestly, kudos to Subaru for getting through it and not losing track of that for everyone. That he still cared about every single person around him to the very end, no matter how many times he saw them die.
I think it speaks to Subaru's character, right? Like he is someone that through all this hardship, doesn't want to give up on the people around him. He wants to love, and he wants to be loved, and it speaks to him over Al in a sense of being the sage for me, because that comes with the wisdom we want for the sage to have, right?
It's that, and Subaru is now past where Al is, in that he is willing to be loved by other people. He's willing to accept that is true, and Al doesn't have that.
And that's what truly allows you to be compatible with authorities, I think. One thing that I realize is that somebody who is wise without love cannot be truly wise, right?
Yeah.
Because accepting love and accepting its truth helps guide so much things about what things mean, right? And that
it gives meaning to anything. If you don't love something, if you don't care about it, then nothing has meaning.
Yeah, we saw Todd. We saw
dust in space.
Todd in this very phase. We see that he cares in quotes about things, but he doesn't actually love them. He doesn't love people. He doesn't love his comrades who help him.
He doesn't love his fiance.
Yeah, he doesn't actually love his fiance. He just sees her an object. He doesn't love that arc. He is able to slaughter all these people mercilessly for his sake, right? And that is the true vacancy, right? It's the true evil. It's life without wisdom, life without love, you know?
And that is why, to Subaru, he's such a good foil and antagonist, because he's not just, I guess, the ultimate sinner in that sense, almost, to his virtue. He's also, as a sociopath, like, someone that can never love.
Yeah, he's devoid of it. He can't get that experience that makes...
there.
And it makes
he doesn't have it in him to get what makes Subaru so strong.
Exactly. It makes sense that in this arc, he's defeated by love.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Exactly.
Oh man, I love this moment so much, and I know that what it brings about with giving Subaru this chance to do it right is super contentious in the community. It is such a controversial point that it undoes everything that he had failed to do in this phase, but it just doesn't feel like that to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel... I'm going to explain why it doesn't feel like that. I think the main issue you have in a lot of moments in stories like this, or like stories that could use this as a plot device, right, is that there is no emotional carry-on from these moments, right? In a lot of instances, it's never, oh, these moments happen, but because I could prevent it, like it's almost like not addressed, almost like the criticisms I had with the second Sparka, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here, even in the climax here, we see the emotional meaning and feeling Subaru has about all of those around him after having this ability to take that back. Like there's a specific moment from Subaru's narration where he's thinking about, I think, that he is so happy that he has these people, right? And that he could see them again, and that he could do this, and that it isn't a moment of Subaru isn't being punished for failing. Subaru is being rewarded for winning because he chose Satella's love. I don't know.
Yeah. It's also, this is very clearly a one-off thing.
Yeah,
like he doesn't have the ability to undo it to the extent that he undoes this phase.
This is very clearly a fix on the mutation of Return by Death, right?
Exactly. Yes, and
if
you didn't expect him to be able to undo this by the end of the loop where he does call to Satella, you might need to re-examine your ability to see foreshadowing and narrative structure and clues.
Because I'm sorry, at that point, if you don't see it, like it's like a uh-oh.
If they hadn't given us or if Tappe hadn't written the named chapters, then I would have believed that these were characters written just to die permanently, and that there wasn't going to be a restart. But because we spent the time to learn them and know them to this degree, yeah, exactly. This is Subaru's squad. If he doesn't have them going forward, there is no success for him. He's lost. The story's over. He has to be able to undo it.
He has to have his boys. It's
He does. And he has his whole squad with them at the end here. And it feels so strong that he's just standing with everybody, like ready to fuck up Todd if he decides to try it.
Oh, it's great. And do you know what's even better? It's everyone chanting, "Let's go fuck up the Empire."
Mm-hmm.
Let's
the Empire that screwed
this.
us all over.
Yeah, that we are the outcasts, we are the disaffected, right? Because we see from, especially Waits' perspective, as someone who was like falsely accused of a crime at first and then fell into criminal behavior because that was all he could do to survive, that a lot of these people may just be innocent, right? And that they've been pushed into this, either by, because we see also for Idra, it was a slavery thing, right? Of he was sold off to the island.
Well, Subaru and Tanza just fell into a lake and got stuck here.
Yeah, and got stuck there.
Unfair.
This is a thing of like, this is unjust. This is wrong. We need to not just take vengeance. We need to break this system and change it. Like Felt says, we need to burn this from the ground down and fucking build something anew on the ashes.
Viva la revolution!
Viva la revolution! Exactly.
Well, to be fair, being a prisoner of a country like Wallachia doesn't necessarily speak ill of your character, considering the character of the country you're imprisoned by.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. And I think it speaks also, and this is another thing I think the story set up so well, is Subaru rebelling against Wallachia, in that we've seen it in all of these phases of him just saying, "I fucking hate Wallachia, man."
He really does.
And then specifically in this phase where we hear him say it multiple times, especially in the first Sparka, I think is where we first hear it in this phase.
I hate this country so much. I hate Wallachia.
Yeah, I absolutely despise this country. And then we get a moment with Hyun in his name chapter where it's like, "I will curse this country with my very soul and being," right? And it just makes me think, and then there's another moment where Subaru's like, I'm not trying to rebel, I'm trying to escape. And then by the end here, we're like, we are fucking burning this down. And it's so satisfying. At that moment where Gustav says, Schwartz-Summer, I am handing this army over to you and your command, your majesty, or your excellence, or whatever he says, I got chills. I was like, this is one thing I did predict, that Subaru was going to get an army.
Yeah, I mean, it's all according to April's plans.
Yeah, and I'm just like, isn't this a really cool moment as like a little king moment for Subaru, right? Of like, he's got his own band of brothers in a way, right? Like he's got his men, his boys, the people that are loyal to him. And I'm curious to see how that's gonna affect Subaru if he loses any of them in battle, right?
Dude, when you get their group name later on, you're gonna be so happy.
Oh no fucking way. Okay.
Yeah, it's just such a big smiling face. But I mean, that's the phase, right?
Yeah, like, Todd runs away because he's scared because they prepared to beat him.
He's a little bitch.
He's a little bitch. That's right.
He's a little bitch and he runs away. And you know what? I want to touch on this a little bit too, which is the fact that I think the people who are part of the Berstedt's faction are people who are misfits that would, a lot of them, like, for example, I forgot her name now, the dragon lady, Madeline Eschart, right?
Mm-hmm.
That once they see Subaru's perspective, I think that there's no way that they don't side with him.
Probably.
Oh, yeah.
Because like, really, the country doesn't work well for people like Araki, who seems like just a mindless servant, right? Like, how crazy is it that this person is supposed to be the second strongest person in the entire country, is so subservient that she will just listen to somebody who has a personality that's bigger than hers?
Yeah.
Like, as Todd was thinking, he's like, I'm just a first-class private, and she's like, I'm supposed to be her elite escort, but I'm the one telling her to do everything.
Interesting point. He says, I'm first class private for now. I think he had a promotion lined up if this went well.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that's true.
Beyond that, I think third class general, like this military structure skips everything between private and general for some reason.
Your generals are cool.
So like, if this was real, like, equivalent, I think that makes him like a staff sergeant. Would be his equivalent rank right now, and that he would get promoted to captain from this. But regardless, he's obviously lost here. Subaru has won.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I really want to talk about is why you guys think the return by death, like, why did he lose Satella's love? Since they like first get regressed. Because if you recall, he does break the taboo with Olbart, and Satella is there, like haunting him again. So it wasn't just the regression that broke this.
My theory, and this is, I don't think it's just, as you say, just the regression. I think it's been happening since the start of the Valakia saga. And I'm going to posit my theory here, right? So, we get this moment where Subaru is very close to Satella in Arc 6. In the Watchtower, she is literally sealed under, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's then teleported away by Volcanica to Valakia as she is reaching to try and grab him. And
right, so go ahead. I have further evidence now because of that reminder. Yeah. Continue.
And then we get ever since the start of the Valakia saga, every single loop we've had has started to become shorter and shorter. We've got shorter paces, less time for Subaru to make mistakes, and less time for Subaru to, actually turn around things and have more time to deal with issues. And it's been shortening ever since the loops began. And it really stilled this for me when we got the first couple loops with Todd in the Fortress City, where he starts to kill him with Flop. And he has so little time to react to it. And it made me start thinking, and now this has solidified it for me, that maybe Satella, because he was so far away from her in another country and, was very distant from him, she's very distant from him physically, maybe that's affecting it somewhat, like her ability to see him and look at him. And maybe the observers thought this was a good time to maybe sneak on in and try and make that even more difficult for her while he was less close to her and within her grasp. Because while he's in Lagunica, he's pretty close to her, right?
Right. He did still have a 10-minute loop in Arc 5, though.
He did, yes. But it's not to the same degree as some of these loops in Arc 7, is it?
Yeah, but the ones in 7 have been, varying as well. Because his loop here, the last one starts out being, I think, 30 minutes back. But then the one in the Sparka is just at the start of Sparka every single time. But the one on the roof is every 11 seconds. So it did get longer after that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, Gold.
I'm wondering if her failing, the seal around her is failing, so she's able to do this stuff, right? I think that's part of it. Either because of the fact that everybody who once sealed her, the seal can only last so long, or whatever. But I think one of the things that could be the case is that if it's lent, right? This power is lent to Subaru. It's like a connection, right? How much can you connect your authority and transfer it to somebody else while still having the signal to do so? The signal being the ode in this case, right? Connecting that to it makes it dissonant, right? But at that point, when it's shared, maybe the lack of signal is in how much time he evokes this taboo, right? It obviously produces a lot of magic, a lot of yin magic. It allows vulnerabilities and opportunities for possession and stuff like this. It's probably how Satella has possessed Amelia in the past and stuff like this. But also, maybe there's a part of it that has to do with when Satella cannot properly control the authority, it becomes Subaru's to control. And because his compatibility with it is still not perfect, it causes it to glitch out or something. Just like how with Al's, right?
Right. My question for you guys, though, was more directed at, the order of events that we saw was Olbart reduces Subaru down, as well as the others. Return by Death is working still on the short term that it has been through a lot of Valakia, but she's still there, she's still haunting him. But by the time we get to the roof, that's gone, and he's restarting instantly until Olbart touches the ode. Then she goes found him, but then we get to the island and she's gone again. So at some point between the hide and seek game beginning to where we are now, something else must have changed that warped way that everything else was around it. And I think there's two main things that could have been.
Oh.
The first one I thought was Yorna using like loving rejection against him.
Yeah.
At the end when Satella is like overwhelming the city or whatever dark shadow is really causing this.
Right.
But the other point was Louis got the powers of gluttony back in between there as well.
Which is, and that's, but Subaru had it. Like, Subaru had parts of it at least, right? So,
And the other time that he got teleported and like he got blasted away in Centivlakia where things started going funky was right after Louis manifested and basically made contact with him and Rem.
Wait, is it possible that Louis is his authority of gluttony?
I mean, possibly.
Maybe it's the same thing.
Yeah, there's some connection though. Like it's either, I think it could be Yorna's powers being connected to love and then using love rejection to blast him away. Could have broken it. Like that's entirely feasible. But there's something with Louis here as well that in hindsight, I'm wondering if it is due to her that Return by Death has been funky.
Yeah, I think one of the things is, there's this loosely defined amount of like complications that we see, and even Tepe's telling us to speculate on it, right? And we all know those complications. But you're right. I think there's a theme here that I think is kind of capitalized in this very phase, which is I was thinking about this earlier. I was like, is it better to have, if you're a sage, and this is weird, is it better to think that you can handle all of these sins yourself, or is it better to have somebody share them with you?
Like how Corleone shares the burden.
Right, exactly. So that's compatible with him. But say, for example, the ones that's incompatible, like maybe envy or gluttony, if somebody who has that authority shares it through whatever weird, odd thing, that odd in both ways thing that Satella seems to be doing with Subaru to give him Return by Death to the first place. What if that there's like a perfect version of this that prevents you from being corrupted into like a witch or a Synarch bishop, which is by sharing that burden with somebody else?
In that vein, then, if we're talking on that, could that not also reflect on the years of the 400 years ago, where maybe the sage dying is what caused, and maybe Satella didn't have like fully absorbed the witch factor, so she didn't split her personalities because she's not fully compatible. But was she sharing the burden with the sage, and then the sage died,
maybe,
and
I can see that
caused her to fully absorb it?
Possibly. Like if what we believe to be the sage, as in they have all the authorities within them. So like,
but maybe it's less literal. Maybe it's those witches existed and they had the authority, and the person who was manifesting it properly was the sage. Like they worked through him,
or he built bonds with them and.
Like let them be able to exist without it.
Yeah.
And it could be like, hey, I'm the artist, you're the muse, or like, you're the person supplying the, like, you're the one giving me paint to draw my pictures with.
Ooh, that's all interesting. But I just wanted to posit those couple of theories here because we are absolutely at time and do need to wrap it up here. But I really enjoyed this phase, and I'm so excited to just keep going with the excitement that we're now getting into for the rest of this arc. These next two phases are just so much fun, start to finish. I am so glad that we got the squad. We got Satella on the team.
Yeah.
Todd's back in the picture and is just as awful as ever, and things are just going to keep ramping up from here. So I didn't have anything else. Either of you gents have any last points to bring up or talk about?
I'm very content with what we had to say today.
I think we hit all the right topics.
Hell yeah. I'm very happy with today's podcast. Really fun theorizing, loads of cool analysis and meta themes and stuff. Let us know in the comments if we're wrong and tell us why we're wrong. Let us know in the comments if we're right and why we're right, or why you have a different opinion. Let us know.
Like this video and give us a comment, please.
If this is interesting to you and you have friends that you like to discuss ReZero with, share this video with them too, and tell them to let us know what they think, because we always read those comments. We love that engagement, and if you're watching up to this point, you're the best. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.